In the quiet expanse of the ancient world, there existed a myth that told of a father's wisdom and a son's ambition. This is the story of Icarus, a tale not of one man's fall, but of the fragile boundary between aspiration and hubris. It is a story that has drifted through time, whispered in the winds, and carried by the currents, reminding us of the delicate balance we must maintain in the pursuit of our dreams. Icarus, the son of the great inventor Daedalus, lived a life touched by the heavens and bound by the earth. His journey, soaring in flight, reaching toward the sun and then falling, is one that has echoed through the ages. As we drift through this myth, let its calm cadence guide you toward a peaceful rest. Let the story of Icarus, of flight and fall, be a gentle meditation on ambition, freedom, and the eternal wisdom of those who have come before us. If you find this journey soothing, like, subscribe, and share where you are watching from. Now, let us begin, softly and slowly, with the tale of Icarus. Long ago, in the ancient land of Crete, there lived a man whose mind was as sharp as a blade, and whose hands could shape even the most complex of creations. His name was Daedalus, and he was a master craftsman, an inventor of the highest order. His work was revered across the lands, not just for its ingenuity, but for its precision, its ability to bring life to the most unimaginable of ideas. It was Daedalus who crafted the labyrinth, a vast and intricate maze built for King Minos, a ruler whose power over Crete was legendary. The labyrinth itself was a wonder. Its twisting corridors and hidden chambers designed to house the Minotaur, a creature born of both human and bull, cursed to live out its days in the maze's heart. No one, not even the mighty king, could navigate its winding passages. And yet, Daedalus, the creator, understood every turn, every path, every secret hidden within its walls. But for all his brilliance, Daedalus found himself bound by his creations. King Minos, once so impressed by Daedalus's genius, became suspicious of him, fearing that the inventor might use his knowledge of the labyrinth to escape or to help others escape. In time, Daedalus was imprisoned in the very maze he had designed, trapped by the walls of his own making. It was here, in this dark and confining place, that Daedalus and his young son, Icarus, would find themselves caught in the tides of fate. Daedalus loved his son dearly, and their bond was strong. Icarus, though young, was already showing the signs of his father's brilliance. His mind was curious, always seeking to understand how things worked, how they could be made better, or how they could be made to fly. The father and son spent many hours together in the shadows of the labyrinth, Daedalus speaking to Icarus of the world beyond, a world full of possibilities that stretched far beyond the maze's cold stone walls. It was a world that seemed distant, unreachable. But Daedalus, ever the inventor, was not content to remain imprisoned. He knew that there was always a way out for those who could see it, and so, with a mind that never ceased to dream, he set to work on a plan that would not only free him, but also allow his son to soar above the walls of Crete, to reach beyond the horizon. In the solitude of the labyrinth, Daedalus began to gather materials: wax, feathers, and string. Things that might seem ordinary to most, but to an inventor like Daedalus, they held the potential for something extraordinary. He would craft wings, not the wings of birds, which were too fragile, nor the wings of angels, which were far too divine. No, Daedalus would create something more practical, more grounded. His wings would be made for flight, yes, but they would also be designed to keep them safe in the skies, no matter how high or how far they would go. As Daedalus worked, he explained his plans to Icarus. They spoke often of the wings, of how they would escape the labyrinth and fly far away from Crete. Icarus, though young, listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder at the thought of flight. To him, the idea of soaring through the skies seemed both exhilarating and impossible, a dream that only the gods could dare to realize. But Daedalus was not a god. He was a man who understood the world in ways that few others could. He knew the laws of nature, the forces of wind and gravity, the way the sun warmed the earth, and how the sea stretched endlessly toward the horizon. He knew that flight, while seemingly impossible, was not beyond reach. He only needed to craft the right tools to harness the elements of the world in a way that had never been done before. And so, Daedalus continued to work in silence, the sound of his hands shaping the wings filling the quiet of the labyrinth. As he worked, he often thought of his son, wondering what the future would hold for him. He wanted Icarus to be free, to experience the world beyond the labyrinth, to see the sun rise and set over the sea, to taste the air of the open sky. Yet, Daedalus also knew the dangers of freedom. He had seen the folly of others who had reached too far, who had sought too much, only to fall. He had learned the lessons of the gods, the stories of those who had defied their limits and paid the price for it. He wanted Icarus to be free, yes, but he also wanted him to be safe. And so, as Daedalus shaped the wings, he spoke to his son, giving him a warning not of fear, but of wisdom. He told Icarus to fly neither too high nor too low. To fly high, close to the sun, would melt the wax that held the wings together, and to fly too low would bring him too close to the sea, where the dampness would weigh him down. Balance, Daedalus told him, was the key to survival. The sky was vast, but it was also full of unseen dangers. With the wings finally complete, Daedalus attached them to himself and to Icarus. The moment of flight had come. They stood at the edge of the labyrinth, ready to take to the sky. Daedalus, ever calm and measured, knew that this was a moment that would change everything, not just for him, but for his son as well. The wings, though simple in appearance, were a testament to Daedalus's brilliance. Made of feathers and wax, They were a symbol of both human ingenuity and human fragility. They represented the possibility of soaring, but also the dangers of ambition. As Daedalus and Icarus prepared to leave the earth behind, there was a sense of quiet anticipation. The wind whispered through the labyrinth, carrying with it the promise of freedom. And so, father and son stood together, ready to embrace the vast expanse of the sky, uncertain of what the future would hold, but certain of one thing. They were about to begin a journey that would carry them beyond the reach of their prison, beyond the reach of all they had ever known. And so the flight began. The winds of Crete swept across the ancient land, carrying with them the faint scent of salt and the promise of the open sea. The island, known for its myths and mysteries, held within it a tale of two lives intertwined by both fate and ambition. At the heart of this tale was Icarus, the son of Daedalus, whose journey into the skies would come to symbolize both the beauty and the peril of human desire. Icarus was born to Daedalus and Naucrate, a woman of wisdom and grace, whose love for her son and her husband had always been steadfast. She had watched as Daedalus, a man whose mind surpassed even the gods in craft and creativity, had worked tirelessly, shaping the world with his hands. It was with this same passion that Icarus was brought into the world, a world already brimming with challenges, mysteries, and the weight of destiny. From the very beginning, Icarus was a child of curiosity. Even as an infant, he would reach out with his small hands to explore the world around him. Daedalus, ever the observer, would watch with pride as his son touched the world with the same inquisitive nature he himself had once possessed. It was this shared spark of curiosity that would form the foundation of their bond, a bond that would prove essential as their lives unfolded. As Icarus grew, so too did his understanding of the world. The walls of the labyrinth, a creation of Daedalus's genius, had always been a symbol of constraint, of a world too vast to fully comprehend. Yet it was within these very walls that Icarus's imagination began to soar. He would wander through the winding corridors, his young mind working like a puzzle, always searching for answers. His father, who had crafted the maze to contain the Minotaur, would often take Icarus with him as they walked through its passages. The boy marveled at the complexity of the structure, but he also began to dream beyond it. For Daedalus, the labyrinth was a symbol of his greatness, but for Icarus, it became a symbol of limitation. Though he was just a child, Icarus could not escape the sense that there was something beyond the stone walls of Crete, something greater than the intricate designs of his father's mind. He would ask Daedalus about the world beyond the labyrinth, about the skies and the seas, and his father would tell him stories of distant lands, of heroes and gods, of places where no walls could contain the spirit of adventure. As Icarus listened to these stories, his heart filled with a longing that could not be satisfied by the walls of the labyrinth. The world outside was vast and unknown, full of wonders that only existed in the dreams of those who dared to imagine them. But Icarus did not just dream. He yearned to live those dreams. He wanted to feel the wind in his hair, the warmth of the sun on his skin, and to see the world from above, where no one could limit his freedom. In many ways, Icarus was like his father, for Daedalus too had once dreamed of escaping the confines of his own limitations. But where Daedalus had used his genius to build and create, Icarus was a child of the sky, destined to take flight in ways that no one could have imagined. It was during these early years when Icarus's mind was full of questions and his heart was full of dreams, that Daedalus began to see the signs of greatness in his son. Icarus was not only curious about the world, he had a natural gift for invention, for understanding the inner workings of things. He would often ask his father to teach him how to build, how to create. Daedalus would show him the ways of craftsmanship, teaching him to work with wood, to shape metal, to weave intricate patterns. But while Daedalus's hands were steady and precise, Icarus's hands were quick, restless, always eager to move on to the next idea, the next challenge. The bond between father and son deepened as they worked side by side. Daedalus would share his knowledge, his wisdom, and his experience, while Icarus would bring his youthful energy and enthusiasm to every project they undertook. In many ways, Daedalus saw in Icarus the same spark that had once driven him, an unquenchable thirst for discovery, a hunger to push the boundaries of what was possible. But there was a difference that Daedalus could not ignore. Icarus was not content with merely creating, with simply shaping the world. He wanted to transcend it. He wanted to reach beyond the earth, beyond the walls of the labyrinth, beyond the confines of the human body. He wanted to fly. The stories Daedalus had told him about the gods, about the heroes who soared through the skies, had planted a seed in Icarus's heart. And as the boy grew older, that seed began to grow. He would gaze up at the birds that circled the skies above Crete, and in those birds he saw his future. In their wings he saw freedom, and he dreamed of the day when he, too, would soar. For Daedalus, however, these dreams were tempered by the knowledge of the dangers that awaited those who sought to reach too high. He had seen the folly of others, those who had tried to surpass the limits of human nature and had paid the price for it. He knew that the world had its limits, and that it was important to respect those limits, to understand that there was a balance between ambition and caution. And so, as Icarus grew older, Daedalus began to worry. He worried that his son's dreams of flight would lead him to forget the lessons of wisdom and balance. He worried that, in his desire to break free from the constraints of the world, Icarus would forget the dangers of overreaching, the perils of flying too high or too low. But despite Daedalus's concerns, Icarus's dreams only grew stronger. The boy's heart was filled with a fire that could not be extinguished. He would not be content with merely walking the earth. He longed to soar. And so, it was in the quiet moments of their time together, as father and son worked side by side, that Daedalus began to prepare for the impossible. For as much as he worried for Icarus, he also knew that his son's dreams were a part of him, and that the time would come when those dreams could no longer be contained. It was in these moments, as they shaped the world with their hands, that the seeds of flight were planted. Daedalus had created the labyrinth, but now he would create something far more extraordinary. A way for Icarus to break free from the confines of their world, to soar above the earth, and to reach for the sun. In the days that followed, the winds of fate began to stir in unexpected ways, shifting the lives of many, including Daedalus and Icarus. But these changes did not begin with them. Long before the two of them found themselves trapped in the labyrinth, the royal family of Crete was steeped in a dark tale, one that would, in the end, shape the lives of father and son in ways they could not foresee. The story begins with King Minos, a ruler whose power over Crete was absolute. His kingdom was a place of splendor, with its grand palaces and vast wealth. But despite the outward appearance of greatness, the king's heart was not at peace. Minos had once prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, to send him a sign to prove his divine right to rule. In response, the god sent a magnificent bull from the depths of the ocean. Minos, in his pride and his desire to appear more powerful, took the bull for himself, intending to keep it as his own. This act of greed angered Poseidon, who cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae. She fell victim to a divine wrath that turned her heart towards the very bull Minos had stolen. In a desperate, tragic attempt to satisfy her unnatural desire, Pasiphae sought the help of Daedalus, the genius inventor, to create a hollow cow in which she could hide. The bull, driven by its own wild instincts, did what was natural to it, and Pasiphae bore the offspring of this union, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. This was the Minotaur. The birth of the Minotaur set into motion a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of all involved. Minos, horrified by the creature born of his wife's unnatural union, ordered that it be confined within the labyrinth, a maze of such complexity that no one could ever escape it. Daedalus, ever the master of his craft, built this labyrinth with his own hands, his mind working to create the perfect prison for the beast. But the tragic legacy of the Minotaur did not end with its confinement. The creature, though contained, remained a symbol of the curse that had fallen upon Crete. The land was forced to reckon with the consequences of Minos' pride and Pasiphae's desires. Years later, a bitter tribute would be demanded of Athens, a punishment for their role in the death of Minos' son, Androgeus. Each year, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 maidens to Crete to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. This grim ritual, an offering to appease the wrath of Minos, cast a long shadow over the lives of those who were sent to the island. Among the sacrifices was Theseus, the hero of Athens, who, with the aid of Daedalus, was able to navigate the labyrinth and slay the Minotaur. This act of bravery, however, did not lift the curse on Crete. Instead, it set into motion a darker chapter in the lives of both Minos and Daedalus. Enraged by the death of the Minotaur, Minos imprisoned Daedalus and his son Icarus. Their brilliant minds had aided in the hero's success, and so in his fury, Minos sought to trap them both, to punish them for their involvement in the slaying of the creature. It was here, in the shadow of the labyrinth, that Daedalus and Icarus found themselves once more confined, caught in the web of a story that had been set in motion long before their birth. King Minos, having once been the master of a grand kingdom, was now a ruler beset by the consequences of his own actions, as well as by the divine punishment that seemed to follow him at every turn. In his anger, Minos had trapped Daedalus and Icarus within the walls of his island prison, a prison from which it seemed there was no escape. For Daedalus, the situation was bitter. He had crafted the labyrinth and seen its complexity, and yet now he found himself ensnared by it, caught in a web spun not by his own hands, but by the consequences of others' actions. His brilliance, which had once earned him the favor of kings and gods, was now the very thing that had led him to this dark place. There was no solace in this realization, no comfort in knowing that his mind had been both a gift and a curse. He had been caught in a cycle, a spiral of fate that had begun with the selfish desires of a king and a queen, and would end with his own imprisonment. But it was in this moment, when the walls of his prison seemed to close in around him, that Daedalus saw the spark of possibility in his son. For while the labyrinth of Crete seemed inescapable, the labyrinth of the human heart was something far different. Icarus, with his boundless curiosity, had always looked beyond the walls, always dreamed of freedom and flight. It was this dream that Daedalus would cling to, for it was the one thing that had not yet been corrupted by the dark legacy of Crete. Thus, Daedalus began to plan again, to dream once more. For even in the face of the tragedy that had unfolded, there was still the chance for a new beginning, a chance for escape, a chance for flight. His mind, though weighed down by the gravity of their situation, remained sharp, and as Daedalus set to work on his final creation, the wings that would carry him and Icarus away from their prison, he did so with the quiet hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could break free of the dark legacy that had followed them all their lives. Imprisoned in the heart of Crete, far from the sunlit shores and the freedom of the skies, Daedalus and Icarus found themselves caught in the unforgiving grip of King Minos's wrath. The labyrinth, once a masterpiece of Daedalus's genius, now held them captive, a twisted symbol of both their creativity and their downfall. The walls that had once housed the monstrous Minotaur now confined the brilliant inventor and his son, whose dreams of flight seemed, in that moment, as distant as the stars. But Daedalus was a man who had never been one to accept fate without a fight. Even in the face of this overwhelming despair, he knew that the same ingenuity that had brought him to Crete could lead him out. In his mind, the maze that had once held the Minotaur could now be a path to freedom. His thoughts, though clouded by the weight of his imprisonment, remained sharp, his mind always seeking a way to overcome the barriers set before him. He would not be confined to the earth, nor would he let his son suffer the same fate. There had to be a way to escape. And so, Daedalus began to craft once more, not in stone or wood, but in the very elements of nature. With his knowledge of the world, he set to work gathering what he could. He needed materials that were strong, yet light, durable, yet capable of flight. Wax, feathers, and string, simple things, things that might seem like they had no place in such a grand escape, became the building blocks of his plan. Icarus, ever the eager learner, watched his father closely. He could sense the change in Daedalus, the quiet determination that burned in his eyes. Though the air in their prison was thick with the weight of their situation, Icarus saw that his father was not giving in to despair. Instead, Daedalus was doing what he did best. He was creating. As the days passed, the wings began to take shape. Daedalus, with his steady hands and precise movements, constructed each feather with care, layering them with wax to hold them in place. He worked in silence, his focus absolute. Icarus, full of youthful excitement and wonder, could barely contain his curiosity. He watched in awe as his father transformed simple materials into something that seemed to defy the very nature of the world. It was, in its own way, a miracle, a creation that would allow them to defy the boundaries of the earth and take flight. Daedalus worked without rest, determined to complete the wings. He knew that this was their only chance, that their escape depended on the success of this creation. The wings would carry them above the walls of the labyrinth, away from the watchful eyes of King Minos and his soldiers. They would fly, just as Daedalus had once dreamed of doing. But, as always, there was a cost. Daedalus knew the risks. Flight was a dangerous endeavor. The wings, though ingenious, were fragile. Too high, too close to the sun, and the wax would melt. Too low, too close to the sea, and the dampness would weigh them down. With the wings finally completed, Daedalus turned to his son. He looked at Icarus with a quiet intensity, his heart heavy with the weight of the moment. Though he had crafted the wings, though he had created a way out, he knew that the greatest danger lay ahead. Flight was not just a physical challenge. It was a test of wisdom, of restraint. And Daedalus knew that he would have to impart that wisdom to his son, to prepare him for the journey they were about to undertake. He spoke to Icarus then, his voice calm but firm. He told his son the dangers of flight, the importance of balance. "Do not fly too high," Daedalus warned, "for the sun will melt the wax that holds your wings together. And do not fly too low, for the sea's dampness will weigh you down." Keep your path steady and true, and you will be safe. These words, simple yet profound, were meant as a guide, an anchor to keep Icarus grounded as he soared through the skies. Daedalus's heart was filled with a quiet fear, not for himself, but for his son. He knew that the freedom they were about to experience was both a gift and a burden. That flight carried with it both the potential for greatness and the risk of ruin. With the wings now strapped securely to their backs, Daedalus and Icarus stood at the edge of their prison. The air around them felt different, lighter, as if the very earth itself were holding its breath. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, as if the world was waiting to see what would happen next. The sun, still low on the horizon, cast a warm glow across the landscape, painting the sky with hues of gold and amber. And then, with a single motion, Daedalus and Icarus took flight. The feeling of the wind rushing beneath their wings was unlike anything either of them had ever known. It was as if they had been born to soar, as if the very sky had opened up to receive them. The ground fell away, and they rose higher and higher into the air. Icarus, his heart racing with exhilaration, could not help but feel a surge of joy. He had done it. He was flying. The freedom he had longed for, the freedom his father had promised him, was finally his. As they flew, Daedalus led the way, his steady hand guiding them through the air. Icarus, for all his enthusiasm, stayed close, following his father's movements, keeping his path true. The world below them stretched out in a tapestry of greens and blues, the sea glistening in the distance, the land far below a mere shadow of what it had once been. For a brief moment, all was right in the world. They were free, soaring above the earth, escaping the confines of their prison. But even in this moment of freedom, there lingered the knowledge of danger, the knowledge that flight was not without its risks. And Daedalus, ever watchful, kept his eyes on the horizon, guiding them towards safety. The journey had begun, and with it the promise of a new life. But the path ahead would not be without its challenges. The winds of fate, like the winds of the sky, are unpredictable. And even as they soared toward the horizon, Daedalus knew that the greatest test was yet to come. As the warm sun bathed the sky in soft hues of gold and amber, Daedalus and Icarus soared above the sprawling island of Crete, leaving behind the walls of their prison. The wind beneath their wings carried them farther from the labyrinth, from the grip of King Minos, and into the boundless freedom that only the sky could offer. But as they flew, a new chapter of their journey began, not one of pure joy, but of quiet purpose. This was the culmination of Daedalus's greatest creation, the product of his mind and his craftsmanship, the wings that had taken them to this moment of flight. Daedalus had been more than a master of invention. He was a creator of possibilities. To him, the wings were not simply tools for escape. They were a symbol of humanity's ability to reach beyond the earth, beyond its limitations. He had crafted them with care, understanding the delicate balance between ambition and caution. The wings themselves were made of the simplest of materials: wax, feathers, and string. Yet in Daedalus's hands, they became a work of unparalleled ingenuity, a bridge between the earth and the heavens. As he and Icarus flew, Daedalus thought back on the hours he had spent in the quiet solitude of their prison, crafting each feather, each layer of wax with the utmost precision. He had woven the wings not just to carry them, but to protect them, to allow them to fly high without falling into the dangers that lay both above and below. Each wing was an intricate tapestry of feathers arranged to catch the wind, and wax used to hold everything together. Daedalus had designed them to be light yet sturdy, capable of withstanding the turbulence of the sky, but fragile enough to remind their wearers of their own vulnerability. The process of creating the wings had not been easy. Daedalus had worked long hours, often with only the light of a dim lantern to guide him. Each feather had to be carefully chosen, each piece of wax meticulously molded to fit its place. But it was not just the craftsmanship that had made the wings extraordinary. It was the thought behind them. Daedalus had considered every possibility, from the height of the sun to the dampness of the sea below. He knew that flight was not simply about soaring, it was about balance, restraint, and respect for the forces of nature. For Icarus, watching his father create had been a moment of awe. The wings, though fragile, seemed to hold the promise of endless possibilities. Icarus had always dreamed of flight, but now, as he stood beside his father with the wings strapped to his back, it felt as if a new world had opened up before him. The freedom he had longed for was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality. And yet, even as the exhilaration of flight filled his heart, there was something more profound that began to take root. The wings, though beautiful and awe-inspiring, were a reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and caution. As they soared higher, Daedalus could not help but feel a quiet sense of unease. He had created something magnificent, yes, but he also knew the cost of ambition. The wings were not invincible. The wax that held them together was vulnerable to the heat of the sun, and the feathers, though strong, were delicate. The very nature of flight carried with it risks, and Daedalus's mind, ever calculating, weighed these dangers with every beat of his wings. Icarus, on the other hand, was consumed by the thrill of flight. For him, the world was vast and open, a canvas upon which he could paint his dreams. He had never felt so alive, so free. The wind in his hair, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the endless sky stretching out before him. It was everything he had ever wanted. In that moment, nothing seemed impossible. The wings, though fragile, felt like an extension of his own body. He was no longer bound by the earth or the stone walls of the labyrinth. He was free. But Daedalus, ever watchful, knew that this freedom came with a price. The wings, for all their beauty and potential, were a reminder of the fragility of life itself. He had warned Icarus to fly neither too high nor too low, to maintain a steady course. These were not simply words of caution. They were the wisdom of experience, the knowledge that ambition, unchecked, could lead to ruin. And yet, as they flew, Icarus seemed to grow more and more intoxicated by the thrill of the journey. His wings beat faster, and his gaze lifted toward the heavens. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing could stop him. The sky stretched out endlessly, and the world below grew smaller with every passing moment. Icarus, his heart racing with excitement, forgot the warning that his father had so carefully given. He began to climb higher, his wings catching the wind with increasing strength. The sun, warm and bright, bathed the world in its light, and Icarus could not resist the pull of the heavens above. Daedalus, watching his son's ascent, felt a tightening in his chest. The wind, once gentle, began to feel heavier. He knew the dangers of flight all too well. The sun, so radiant and powerful, would soon begin to melt the wax that held Icarus's wings together. But in his youthful exuberance, Icarus seemed unaware of the danger. He was caught in the spell of the moment, in the belief that the sky could hold him forever. As father and son flew side by side, Daedalus struggled to keep pace. His heart ached with a quiet fear, knowing that the very freedom they sought could lead to their downfall. He called out to Icarus, but the wind, though gentle, carried his words away. In his heart, Daedalus prayed that his son would listen, that he would remember the wisdom that had been passed down to him. But as the sun grew brighter and the wax in Icarus's wings began to soften, Daedalus knew that the time for caution was quickly passing. The wings, though brilliantly crafted, were not invincible. They were fragile, as was the human spirit, and Daedalus knew that their flight, for all its beauty, could not last forever. The world below them, once vast and intimidating, now seemed like a distant memory, a mere shadow beneath their wings. As Daedalus and Icarus soared higher into the sky, the land of Crete stretched out in a tapestry of greens and blues, the seas shimmering in the early light of the day. The sun, still low on the horizon, bathed everything in a soft golden glow, its warmth caressing their faces as they flew. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing could interrupt the tranquility of this flight, this delicate escape from the prison that had once been their world. Daedalus, ever the cautious and measured soul, flew steadily beside his son, his wings cutting through the air with the precision of an artisan's hand. He had crafted these wings with every possibility in mind, every potential danger accounted for, every risk mitigated. He knew that this journey was not just one of freedom. It was a journey that demanded wisdom, restraint, and care. It was a journey that would test the limits of both their physical endurance and their resolve. Icarus, however, was filled with an exuberance that could not be contained. The world, now so small beneath him, seemed to open up before him in a way he had never known. The wind rushed past his face, his wings beat with a rhythm of their own, and the vast sky above beckoned him onward. For Icarus, this moment of flight was everything he had ever dreamed of. It was freedom, pure, unbridled freedom. The earth below, the constraints of the labyrinth, the walls that had once bound him, none of that mattered now. In the sky, he was untouchable, limitless. Daedalus, though lost in the serenity of flight, kept a watchful eye on his son. He saw the joy in Icarus's face, the sheer exhilaration of soaring through the air. It was a joy that mirrored his own in his younger days, a joy that reminded him of the dreams that had once driven him to create, to invent, to push beyond the boundaries of the known world. But Daedalus also knew the dangers that lay ahead. The fragile wings that could only withstand so much, the sun's burning heat that could turn their freedom into ruin. As they flew together, Daedalus repeated his warning, though it was unnecessary, for Icarus had already heard it many times. "Remember, my son," Daedalus said, his voice steady. "Do not fly too high, for the sun's heat will melt the wax that holds your wings together. And do not fly too low, for the dampness of the sea will weigh you down. Keep your path steady, and you will be safe." Icarus, his heart filled with excitement, nodded, but his attention was elsewhere. The sky stretched out before him, endless and inviting. The horizon seemed to shimmer with promise. He could feel the pull of the sun, the warmth that beckoned him higher, higher still, as if to embrace the very heavens themselves. He had heard his father's words, but in that moment they felt like a distant echo, barely audible over the rushing wind. The thrill of flight, the exhilaration of freedom, drowned out all else. And so, as father and son flew through the open sky, a subtle distance began to form between them. Daedalus, ever the cautious guide, kept his pace steady, his wings cutting through the air with measured precision. He had flown before, had travelled through the heavens, and he understood the balance required to navigate such a vast and unpredictable world. But Icarus, young and full of life, found himself carried away by the sheer joy of flight. His wings beat faster, stronger, and before long he began to climb higher, pulling away from his father. At first it was a small shift, barely noticeable. Daedalus, focused on maintaining his own steady course, did not immediately realize how far Icarus had strayed. But as Icarus continued to rise, the wind tugging at his wings, the distance between them grew. The sun, which had once been a warm, comforting presence, now seemed more distant, more dangerous. It called to Icarus, its golden light drawing him upward, urging him towards something greater. Daedalus, noticing the shift, called out to his son, "Icarus, stay steady. Remember what I told you. Do not go too high." But the wind was louder now, and the sun seemed to beckon with a voice of its own. Icarus, caught in the euphoria of flight, heard the words but did not heed them. Higher and higher he climbed, leaving the earth far below, leaving his father behind. The sky seemed to open up to him, offering a freedom that was intoxicating, a freedom that made all other considerations seem small and distant. Daedalus, seeing the danger growing with each beat of Icarus's wings, began to call out more urgently, his voice rising above the wind. "Icarus, come back! The sun will melt the wax. You must come down." But Icarus, now far above, could barely hear the words. The sun, burning brightly above him, filled him with an overpowering sense of power. He felt invincible, untouchable. Nothing could stop him. He was flying higher than any man before him. The air grew thinner, the world below smaller, and the sky seemed to stretch on forever. The wings, though fragile, felt as though they could carry him to the very edge of the heavens themselves. And then, as if in response to his ambition, the sun began to burn hotter. The heat, once a gentle warmth, now grew unbearable. The wax that held the feathers of Icarus's wings together began to soften, to melt, to lose its strength. His wings, once a marvel of Daedalus's ingenuity, began to falter. The feathers, no longer held firm, began to slip and slide away. Icarus, unaware of the impending disaster, continued to rise, his wings growing weaker with each passing moment. The sun, now fierce and unforgiving, began to take its toll. The wax that had once bound the feathers together softened and melted, and with it the structure of the wings began to unravel. Icarus, still caught in the thrall of his flight, could feel the change, but it was too late. The freedom he had so longed for, the exhilaration of flight, was now slipping away, as fragile as the wings that had carried him to such heights. The world around him, once filled with promise, began to close in, and the ground below, which had once seemed so distant, now felt terrifyingly close. As Icarus soared higher into the sky, the golden light of the sun bathed him in its intense, radiant heat. His wings, once strong and stable, began to weaken, the wax that held the feathers together softening in the warmth. The once smooth, flawless structure of the wings now seemed to sag, the edges beginning to buckle and melt away. Yet Icarus, still lost in the euphoria of flight, remained unaware of the impending danger. The rush of the wind in his face, the sensation of soaring above the world, was more intoxicating than anything he had ever known. But far below, Daedalus could see the change. He had always been a man of reason, his mind calculating, precise. And as he watched his son rise higher, leaving him behind, a sinking feeling grew in his chest. Daedalus had known the risks. He had known that flight was a delicate balance, and he had warned Icarus to fly neither too high nor too low. He had crafted the wings with care, taking into account every potential danger, every variable. But now, as he looked up at his son, he could see the fragile wings beginning to falter. Daedalus had never been one to act without thought, but as he saw the distance between them grow, a sense of urgency took hold. He called out to Icarus again, his voice rising above the wind. "Icarus, come down! The sun, it will melt the wax." But Icarus, his mind consumed by the thrill of flight, could not hear the words. The sun seemed to glow brighter, its warmth enveloping him as he continued to climb. He felt a sense of freedom so pure, so exhilarating, that nothing else seemed to matter. The earth below, the oceans stretching far out in the distance, seemed irrelevant in the face of this boundless sky. He had long dreamed of flying, and now that he had reached it, he could not imagine ever turning back. Daedalus, growing frantic, flew faster to catch up. His wings beat in rhythm, but the distance between them continued to widen. He could see the changes in Icarus's flight, the subtle shift in his movements. The wings, once so elegant and stable, began to look unstable. The feathers, once firm and solid, fluttered weakly in the air, no longer holding the shape they had when Daedalus had first crafted them. Icarus had flown too high, too close to the sun. "Icarus!" Daedalus cried once more, the words of warning now desperate. "Please, come back. The wings, your wings are failing." But Icarus, caught in the allure of the heavens, paid no mind to his father's cries. He had never felt more alive, more powerful, as if nothing could touch him. He had reached the heights of the gods themselves, and the sky was his to conquer. The wings, though weakening, still held him aloft, and in that fleeting moment he believed they always would. The sun, now fierce and all-encompassing, continued to burn overhead. Icarus, in his youthful arrogance, felt the heat, but did not understand the consequences. He did not realize that every upward motion, every beat of his wings, was drawing him closer to the very source of his destruction. The warmth, which had once felt so comforting, now grew unbearable, and the wax that held his wings together began to soften in earnest. Icarus's ascent, once graceful and steady, began to falter. The wax began to give way, the delicate structure of the wings starting to unravel. Icarus, still unaware of the danger, felt a sudden lightness in his body, a sensation that seemed to lift him even higher. But this was no longer the freedom he had so longed for. The wings, once his ticket to the heavens, were now failing him, the feathers slipping away from the wax, and the delicate threads of string that held them together beginning to snap under the weight of the sun's relentless heat. In those final moments, the realization began to dawn on Icarus. The joy of flight had blinded him to the dangers that had always been there. The warning of his father, repeated countless times, echoed in his mind, but it was too late. The wings were no longer strong enough to carry him. As the sun melted the wax completely, the wings began to lose their form. One by one, the feathers detached, and with each loss, Icarus's flight grew more erratic. The wind that had once lifted him now seemed to pull at him, dragging him downward. The world, once so vast and beautiful, now seemed to close in around him. And then, with a final, terrible crack, the wings failed entirely. The wax melted away, leaving only the bare, exposed bones of the structure. Icarus, unable to keep his flight, began to fall. The wind, once a gentle companion, now howled as Icarus plummeted toward the earth. The descent, once a distant possibility, became an undeniable reality. Daedalus, watching in horror from below, saw his son's wings disintegrate and knew that there was nothing more he could do. He had warned him. He had done all he could. But Icarus had been consumed by the very freedom he had sought. Daedalus's heart sank as he saw his son fall. The world seemed to stop in that moment, the winds quieting as Icarus plummeted through the air. Daedalus, helpless in the face of his son's fall, could only watch as the inevitable unfolded. The sea below, once a distant and beautiful expanse, now loomed large, a cold, unforgiving reality. Icarus fell, faster and faster, until the waters below swallowed him whole. His wings, the symbol of both freedom and hubris, were gone. The dream of flight had turned to tragedy. Daedalus, his heart heavy with grief and sorrow, flew downward toward the sea. There was nothing left to do now but to mourn the loss of his son, the boy who had once shared his dreams and his aspirations. The sky, once a symbol of freedom, now felt empty, as though all the light had been drained from it. The descent was swift, unrelenting, and filled with the bitter sting of inevitability. Icarus, once lifted by the grace of his father's wings, now felt himself falling, faster and faster through the open sky. His mind, clouded with panic and disbelief, could hardly process the tragic unraveling of his dream. The very wings that had carried him so high, that had once seemed invincible, were now a memory of freedom lost. His body, weightless for a moment, now felt the oppressive pull of gravity. The wind, which had once been his companion, now became his enemy, roaring past him as he plummeted toward the sea below. Icarus, in those fleeting moments of clarity, could feel the stinging heat of the sun's rays on his exposed skin, the warmth of the sky, now a cruel reminder of his overreach. As he fell, the world around him seemed to blur. The sky, once so vast and full of possibilities, now seemed like a closed space, pressing down upon him, suffocating him. His wings, once strong and graceful, had dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the feeling of falling, of helplessness. His heart, once full of excitement and ambition, now beat wildly in fear. Icarus knew in those final moments that the freedom he had so longed for was slipping away. The earth below, once so distant and out of reach, now loomed large and unforgiving. The sea, cold and merciless, stretched out beneath him, a vast expanse that seemed to swallow everything in its path. Icarus felt as though the very world had turned against him, as though the dreams he had chased so tirelessly had betrayed him. Yet, even as the realization of his fall took hold, there was something else within him, a quiet, sorrowful understanding of the price of his ambition. The wings, so carefully crafted by Daedalus, had been his ticket to the heavens, but in his youthful arrogance, he had failed to understand their fragility. He had failed to recognize the delicate balance that was required to achieve greatness, the balance between soaring high and remaining grounded. The descent continued, a final, brutal journey toward the sea. In the few moments that remained, Icarus's thoughts turned to his father, the man who had crafted the wings, who had warned him so carefully, who had shared in his dreams. Daedalus had always been the steady hand, the protector, the one who knew the limits of human ambition. Icarus, in his desire to transcend those limits, had ignored the very wisdom his father had imparted. Now, as he fell, the realization that he would never see Daedalus again settled heavily in his heart. He would never return to the labyrinth, never experience the quiet moments of creation with his father. The world, once full of promise, now felt distant and unreachable. The sun, which had seemed so warm and inviting, now seemed cold and indifferent. As Icarus continued to fall, the water below grew larger, its dark depths now threatening to claim him. The wind, once a powerful force beneath his wings, now howled around him, pulling him downward. The world seemed to close in around him. The sky, once so vast, now felt like a small, suffocating space. The sea, its surface reflecting the sun's light, seemed both distant and close, a mirror of the vast emptiness he now felt inside. And then, with a final, terrifying rush, Icarus hit the sea. The impact was jarring, the cold water swallowing him whole. For a moment, everything went still. The world, once full of sound and sensation, now seemed muffled, distant. Icarus's body, battered and broken from the fall, sank into the depths of the ocean. The water, though cold and unforgiving, offered no comfort, no solace. It was the final resting place for the boy who had once dreamed of the skies, who had once believed that nothing could hold him back. The sea, in its vastness, seemed to claim Icarus, pulling him further into its depths. The wings that had once carried him to such heights now floated on the surface, their feathers torn and scattered by the wind and the waves. They were nothing now but remnants of a dream, symbols of a flight that had ended in tragedy. As Icarus sank into the dark, cold waters, the world above seemed to drift further away. The sky, so wide and infinite, was now just a distant memory. The sea, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, had become his tomb. Icarus, in those final moments, felt the weight of his own ambition, The fall had come, swift and brutal, as it always does when the sky is reached without caution. Daedalus, still soaring above the sea, had watched in horror as his son fell. He had called out, he had warned him, but there had been nothing he could do. The wind, the sun, the very forces of nature had conspired against Icarus, and now Daedalus found himself helpless, unable to save the boy he loved. The sky, once a symbol of freedom, now seemed empty and cold. Daedalus, with a heart heavy with grief, descended toward the water. His wings, though still strong, seemed to falter as he neared the spot where Icarus had fallen. He had crafted the wings, had given his son the gift of flight, but it had come at a cost. The sea below, dark and unforgiving, held no answers, only the silence that followed the crash of a dream. When Daedalus finally reached the water, he searched the surface, his eyes scanning for any sign of his son. But there was nothing. The waves had swallowed Icarus whole, and with it the hope of a future unburdened by the weight of ambition. All that was left was the sea, endless and cold. The sea stretched out before Daedalus, vast and silent, its surface now calm, as though it too had absorbed the sorrow of the moment. The wind that had once carried his wings so confidently now seemed to whisper, carrying with it the heavy weight of grief. Daedalus hovered above the water, his eyes fixed on the place where Icarus had fallen. The waves gently lapped at the remnants of the wings, their feathers scattered like fragile memories on the surface. Daedalus had seen many things in his life. He had crafted wonders, escaped from prisons, and outwitted kings. He had built the labyrinth, a maze so intricate that no one, not even the Minotaur, could find their way through. He had crafted wings that carried the promise of freedom, of flight beyond the walls of Crete, beyond the confines of his own mind. Yet, in the end, it was not his ingenuity or his intellect that could save his son. His heart, heavy with sorrow, sank deeper than the wings now drifting in the water. The loss of Icarus was a wound unlike any Daedalus had ever known. The boy, so full of life, of promise, had been his companion, his pride. They had shared a bond that only a father and son could understand, a bond that had been built on shared dreams and quiet moments of creation. It was a bond that had seemed unbreakable until, in the span of a single reckless moment, it had been shattered. Daedalus had warned Icarus, had given him the wisdom of his own experience, but it had been in vain. The boy had flown too high, reaching for the sun, believing that nothing could hold him back. And now he was gone. The wings, once a symbol of freedom, had failed him, and with them the dream of flight had ended in tragedy. As Daedalus descended toward the water, his wings moving slowly in the heavy air, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The joy of flight, of the freedom that had seemed so attainable, was now a memory. a bitter reminder of the price of ambition. Daedalus had created the wings with love, with care, hoping that they would give Icarus the chance to experience the world in ways he never could. But that very freedom had led to his son's undoing. Daedalus landed softly on the water's edge, his feet brushing the surface, and he knelt, his hands trembling as he gathered the remains of the wings that had once carried his son. The feathers, now torn and scattered, were all that remained of Icarus's flight, a flight that had been filled with such promise, but had ended in a flash of brilliance and a fall that had come far too soon. The grief that Daedalus felt was not just for the loss of his son, but for the dreams that had died with him. Icarus had been his legacy, the continuation of all his hopes and ambitions. In teaching him to fly, Daedalus had hoped that his son would be free to explore the world, to see the wonders that lay beyond Crete. He had wanted Icarus to experience the sky in all its beauty, to reach for the sun, to feel the wind in his hair and the sun on his face. But in the end, it was that very desire for freedom that had cost Icarus his life. Daedalus stood, the broken wings in his hands, and looked out at the sea. The water, dark and cold, seemed to stretch on forever, as though it held the memory of his son's flight, his fall, and the silence that followed. The waves, once gentle, now felt like a cold embrace, pulling at his heart with a force that he could not escape. In that moment, Daedalus understood the true cost of his genius. The wings, the creation that had promised freedom, had led to the loss of everything he held dear. He had given Icarus the world, the sky, the heavens themselves, and in return he had lost his son. The silence that followed Icarus's fall was deafening. There were no words, no sounds that could fill the void that now existed in Daedalus's heart. He had created so many things in his life, masterpieces, inventions, wonders, but none of them had prepared him for this. None of them had taught him how to cope with the loss of his son, with the weight of the emptiness that now filled the space Icarus had once occupied. For a long time, Daedalus stood there, his hands clutching the remnants of the wings, staring out at the sea. The sun, once a symbol of hope and ambition, now seemed like a distant, indifferent force, its rays casting long shadows across the water. The sky, which had once seemed so wide and full of possibility, now felt narrow and suffocating, a reminder of the fragility of human dreams. And yet, even in his sorrow, Daedalus knew that life would continue. The world would go on, the sun would rise and set, and the sea would continue to roll toward the shore. But for Daedalus, nothing would ever be the same. The wings, now broken and useless, were a symbol of what had been lost, of the price that had been paid for the pursuit of freedom. Daedalus knew that he would carry this grief with him for the rest of his days. But in his heart, there was also a quiet, bitter-sweet understanding that in giving Icarus the wings, he had given him a gift, one that had come with both joy and pain. For even in death, Icarus had soared, had touched the sky in ways that no one else ever would. And that, in the end, was something that no tragedy could take away. Daedalus stood at the water's edge, the remnants of the wings still clutched tightly in his hands. The gentle waves lapped at his feet, their rhythm almost like a soft, mournful lullaby that echoed through the silent air. The world around him, once so full of possibility, now felt cold, empty, and distant. The sea, with its vast expanse stretching out before him, seemed to absorb the weight of his grief, the weight of a loss too heavy to put into words. As he stood there, his mind moved through the events that had led to this tragic moment. The wings, once symbols of freedom, of hope, of a future unbound by the walls of Crete, had failed. His son, Icarus, had been lost, not because of a lack of potential, not because of a lack of will, but because of the reckless ambition that had driven him to soar beyond his father's wisdom. Icarus had sought the sun, and in doing so had reached beyond the limits of what was safe, beyond the boundaries of what was possible. The wax that had held the wings together had melted, and in the blink of an eye, the dream of flight had turned to tragedy. Daedalus had warned him. He had tried to guide him, but in the end, it had been Icarus's own desire to break free that had led to his downfall. The waves continued to roll, their soft lapping a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Daedalus's heart. He had done all he could. He had given Icarus wings, wings that had carried him high into the sky, above the prison of Crete, above the labyrinth of his own life. And yet, the cost had been too great. As Daedalus stood there, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, a thought began to form in his mind. The sea, the very sea that had claimed his son, would now bear his name. The place where Icarus had fallen, where his body had been swallowed by the waves, would be remembered. The sea would carry his son's name, just as the sky had carried his dreams. In the days that followed, as Daedalus returned to the land of Crete, he spoke of his son to all who would listen. He spoke of the boy who had dared to soar, who had reached for the sun with the same boundless ambition that had once driven him. And in doing so, he gave the sea a new name, the Icarian Sea, named for the son who had dared to fly too close to the sun. It was not a name given in pride or in celebration, but in sorrow, a reminder of the cost of ambition, the price of freedom. The Icarian Sea would forever carry the memory of Icarus, the boy who had flown with the gods, only to fall from their grace. The naming of the Icarian Sea was Daedalus's way of ensuring that Icarus would not be forgotten. It was a way for him to keep his son's spirit alive, to ensure that the world would remember the boy who had dared to dream. Daedalus, in his grief, had found a small comfort in this act of remembrance, knowing that the sea would forever carry the legacy of his son's flight. But as Daedalus stood by the water, the name, Icarian Sea, did little to ease the aching emptiness in his chest. No name, No memorial, no act of remembrance could bring his son back. The wings, the flight, the fall, they were all gone. What remained was a quiet sorrow, a loss that would stay with him for the rest of his life. For a long while, Daedalus stood there, staring out at the sea. The sun, now lower in the sky, cast a warm golden glow over the waters, turning the surface into a shimmering expanse of light. It was a sight that should have been beautiful, but to Daedalus it was a painful reminder of what had been lost. The sea, once a symbol of vast possibilities, now felt like a vast emptiness, a place where dreams had died. Yet, in the quiet of the moment, Daedalus could not help but think of his son. Icarus had been so full of life, so full of promise. In his brief flight, he had touched the sky, had glimpsed a world beyond what most people could ever dream of. Daedalus had given him that gift, had crafted the wings that had allowed him to fly. And even in his fall, Icarus had achieved something few could ever imagine. Perhaps, Daedalus thought, it was not the fall that defined his son, but the flight. Icarus had soared. He had reached for something greater than himself. And in that moment of flight, he had been free, free from the constraints of the earth, free from the expectations placed upon him, free to be his true self. The fall, though tragic, was just a moment in the greater journey, a reminder of the fragility of dreams, but not the end of them. In the distance, the waves continued to roll, each one a quiet reminder of the passage of time. Daedalus knew that the sea would never be the same for him. It would forever bear the name of Icarus, but it would also carry the weight of his loss. The sea, in its vastness, would always remind Daedalus of the boy who had soared too high. With a final, lingering glance at the horizon, Daedalus turned away from the water. His wings, though heavy with sorrow, still carried him, still gave him the ability to move forward. He would never forget his son. He would never forget the dream they had shared, the wings they had crafted together, the flight that had been so full of promise. And so, Daedalus walked away from the shore, carrying with him the memory of Icarus, his son, his legacy, his flight. The loss of Icarus lingered in Daedalus's heart, a shadow that never quite left him. It was not the sort of grief that could be put away or forgotten. It was a grief that became part of him, woven into the very fabric of his being. For the first time, Daedalus understood the full weight of his genius, not just in the creations he had brought to life, but in the lives affected by them. Daedalus, once a man who could craft wonders with his hands, now found himself alone with the remnants of a dream. His wings, those magnificent creations, had failed him, and with them his son's life had slipped away like the feathers of a bird lost in the wind. He had given Icarus the sky, had crafted the wings to lift him beyond the earth, beyond the labyrinth. But in doing so, he had unknowingly given him the means to fly too high. Now, as Daedalus moved through the world once more, the shadows of his past seemed to follow him. Though he continued to craft, continued to create, there was no longer the same spark of joy in his work. His mind, once filled with infinite possibilities, now seemed constrained by the weight of loss. There were no more soaring dreams, no more reckless flights toward the sun. The world felt different now, heavier, quieter. Yet, despite this weight, Daedalus did not retreat into darkness. He did not fall into despair. He had always been a man of action, and though grief had changed him, it did not break him. He knew that the legacy of his creations, the very wings that had carried Icarus, would endure. But it was no longer a legacy of triumph. It was a legacy marked by sorrow, a reminder that even the greatest of inventions, when driven by ambition and not tempered with wisdom, could bring ruin. As Daedalus moved forward, he found himself sought out by others. Kings and queens, philosophers and scholars came to him, drawn by the stories of his brilliance, of the labyrinth he had built, of the wings that had once carried his son. They came to learn from him, to seek the secrets of his genius, and Daedalus, ever the teacher, shared what he could. But his lessons were no longer about the triumphs of invention. They were lessons about balance, caution, and the need to understand the limits of one's reach. His work continued, but it was not the same. The grand creations he once made with such joy now felt like an attempt to fill a void that could never truly be filled. He designed, he built, he crafted, but each piece carried the weight of his son's absence. There was no escaping it. No matter how many times Daedalus rebuilt, reimagined, or created something new, the memory of Icarus hovered over him. One of Daedalus's later creations was a temple, a place of quiet reflection, of remembrance. It stood, sturdy and resolute, in the heart of Crete. Though it was built to honor the gods, Daedalus could not help but see it as a monument to his son. Each pillar, each stone, each intricate carving told a story, not of triumph, but of a journey marked by ambition, by flight, and by fall. It was a place where Daedalus could go to be with his son, even if only in memory. The temple was both a sanctuary and a reminder of what had been and of what had been lost. Over time, the stories of Icarus spread. The myth of the boy who flew too high was told and retold across the land. Poets sang of his flight, his fall, and the price of ambition. And though Daedalus never spoke much of his son's death, never fully opened the wound in his heart, the world came to understand the lessons hidden in the story of Icarus. The myth became a cautionary tale, a tale not of a boy's recklessness, but of the fragility of dreams and the dangers of overreaching. And so, the legacy of Daedalus was not just about the great things he had created, but about the lessons learned from his failures. His legacy was one of wisdom, not just knowledge, of understanding that creation without caution is a path that leads to ruin. He had crafted wings that could carry a man beyond the earth, but he had also learned the hard way that not all flights are meant to be taken. As time went on, Daedalus became a figure of reverence, his name spoken with awe by those who marveled at his skill and ingenuity. Yet there was always a quiet sadness in his eyes, a sadness that no amount of fame, no amount of recognition could erase. The world knew Daedalus as the great inventor, the master of the labyrinth, the creator of wings. But for Daedalus, his greatest creation would always be the son he had lost. Though he continued to build, to create, to teach, there was always a quiet part of him that remained in the past, where Icarus had once soared. The wings that had once carried his son, the wings that had symbolized so much hope, would always remain a part of him, though now they were a part of a tragic story. Daedalus would continue to live, but his life would always be colored by the memory of Icarus, by the boy who had flown too high, and by the father who had loved him with all his heart. Time, as it tends to do, moved on. The myth of Icarus became a tale that stretched across generations, told in whispered voices and sung in the halls of the great palaces. It was a myth that transcended the life of the boy who had flown too high. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fragile nature of human aspiration. The story of Icarus, in its simplicity, had touched something universal, something that would resonate through the ages. But for Daedalus, time did little to dull the ache in his heart. His days were spent in quiet reflection, his nights in dreams that still held his son. He had returned to his work, not because he sought solace in creation, but because it was the only thing that still gave him a sense of purpose. Each invention, each new design, felt like a way to hold on to something that could never be touched again. His son, Icarus, the dream they had shared together. Daedalus, though revered as a master craftsman, had always been a quiet man, never one to seek fame or recognition. His life, shaped by the labyrinth, by the wings he had created, was one of complexity and hidden depths. The world saw only his inventions, his genius, but few understood the grief that had marked his soul. In the quiet moments, as he walked the halls of his workshops or sat beside the sea where his son had fallen, he would sometimes wonder if the world truly understood the cost of flight. As the years passed, the myth of Icarus took on a life of its own. Sculptors, painters, and poets all found inspiration in the boy who had soared too close to the sun. His image appeared in countless works of art, a youthful figure, wings spread wide, ascending toward a bright and distant light. The boy's fall, though tragic, became the focal point of the myth, the defining moment that would shape his legacy. Yet, despite the fame that Icarus had achieved through the telling of his story, it was not fame that Daedalus sought for him. It was remembrance. Daedalus did not want his son to be remembered only for the fall, for the tragic end that had overshadowed the beginning of his flight. He wanted Icarus's name to carry with it more than just the lesson of hubris. He wanted it to carry the light of that brief moment of freedom, that taste of the sky that had been beyond the reach of anyone else. In the years following Icarus's death, Daedalus travelled far and wide. He went to cities, kingdoms, and temples, not just to teach, but to ensure that the story of his son was told properly, with respect and understanding. It was no longer just a story of ambition and loss. It was a story of a boy who had dared to chase a dream that others had deemed impossible. A boy who had touched the sun, even if only for a moment. And so, in the quiet places where Daedalus spent his final years, he ensured that Icarus's name would not be forgotten, and that the world would know the boy for more than just his fall. It was in one of these quiet moments, as he sat by the sea where Icarus had fallen, that Daedalus realized the true legacy he would leave behind, not just in the works he had created, but in the name of his son. The Icarian Sea, named for Icarus, would carry his son's memory forever. The name would live on in every wave that broke upon the shore, in every whispered breeze that passed through the air. But Daedalus also knew that Icarus deserved more than just a name on the sea. His legacy would be more than just a lesson in caution. It would be a reminder that dreams, even the most daring ones, were worth pursuing. Icarus had flown, and though he had fallen, he had done so with a spirit unbroken. Daedalus, in his quiet sorrow, began to speak of Icarus not just as a son, but as a hero. His flight, brief and tragic, would become a symbol of what it meant to truly live, to reach for something greater than oneself, to push beyond the boundaries of the known world, to dare to touch the sky. In Daedalus's mind, Icarus had not failed. He had soared, and that in itself was something worth remembering. The myth would change over time, as all stories do, but the core of it, the flight, the freedom, the ambition, and the fall, would always remain the same. Icarus would forever be a symbol of youthful exuberance, of dreams that stretch beyond the stars, and the price one must pay to chase them. And so, Daedalus, with a heavy heart but a steadfast resolve, ensured that Icarus's name would carry with it not just the shadow of sorrow, but the light of flight, the light of a boy who dared to dream. The tale of Icarus, as it continued to unfold in the myths and stories passed from generation to generation, grew far beyond the life of a single boy. His name became synonymous with the dangers of ambition, the folly of overreaching, and the fragility of human dreams. Yet, buried within the story of his flight, his rise, and his fall, there was a deeper truth, a truth about the nature of human desire itself. Daedalus, in his grief, had often pondered this truth, wondering if the ambition that had driven Icarus to soar so high had been his own doing. Had Daedalus, in his desire to see his son break free of the confines of their imprisonment, unwittingly set Icarus on a path that would lead to his destruction? Perhaps, Daedalus thought, it was not just the wings that had given Icarus the gift of flight, but his own dreams for his son, dreams that had not been tempered with caution. The desire to escape the limits of the earth, to rise above the mundane and the ordinary, is a deeply human one. From the earliest days of history, mankind has dreamed of flight. In the ancient stories, the gods themselves could soar through the heavens, free from the constraints of gravity and time. For mortals like Daedalus and Icarus, that dream seemed both distant and attainable, an idea that hovered just out of reach. And yet, in that brief moment of flight, Icarus had grasped it, touching the sky in a way that no mortal had ever done before. But what of the consequences? What does it mean for a human being to reach beyond their limits, to seek a freedom that nature itself seems to forbid? The fall of Icarus was not just a tragedy, it was a lesson, one that spoke to the heart of human ambition and desire. Icarus had sought the sun, and in doing so had failed to understand the limitations of his wings, of the very nature of his being. He had reached for something so great that it had consumed him, pulling him toward the sun until his wings could no longer bear the weight of his flight. In Daedalus's mind, the myth of Icarus was not a simple cautionary tale about hubris. It was a reflection on the human condition itself, the way in which desire can elevate but also destroy. Icarus's flight was, in many ways, a representation of what it means to be human, a yearning for something greater, a desire to transcend the limitations of the body and the mind, to touch something divine. But that very desire, when unchecked, can be the very thing that leads to ruin. Daedalus, though grief-stricken, found himself reflecting on this truth in his solitude. His own genius had given rise to the wings that had allowed Icarus to fly, but it had also given rise to his son's fall. In this paradox lay the heart of human ambition, an ambition that is capable of both creating and destroying, of reaching for the heavens and crashing to earth. And yet, despite the tragic consequences of Icarus's flight, Daedalus could not help but feel that the boy had, in some way, succeeded. Icarus had flown, had dared to reach beyond the horizon, had broken free from the earth. His brief flight had been a testament to the power of human desire, to the beauty of a dream pursued with all one's heart. The fall had been inevitable, yes, but it did not diminish the act of soaring. For even in his tragic end, Icarus had touched the sky. The myth of Icarus, Daedalus realized, was not just a story of failure. It was a story of the human spirit, a spirit that seeks to rise, to grow, to become more than it is, even when the cost is unknown. Icarus had flown because he had believed, even for a moment, that he could conquer the impossible. And in doing so, he had achieved something that many would never dare to attempt. The fall, though tragic, was not the end of his story. It was merely the final chapter in a journey that had defied the very nature of human existence. Daedalus, though racked with grief, understood this on some level. He had taught his son to fly, but he had also taught him that there are limits to what even the greatest of minds can achieve. Perhaps, Daedalus thought, it was not just the wings that had failed Icarus, but his failure to understand those limits, to understand the fragile balance between the world of dreams and the world of reality. As Daedalus continued his work, as he crafted new inventions and shared his knowledge with others, the story of Icarus remained a part of him. It became a quiet lesson, a meditation on the nature of desire, ambition, and the pursuit of greatness. And while Daedalus would never forget the price of his son's ambition, he also understood that the pursuit of dreams, no matter how dangerous, was an intrinsic part of the human experience. It was what made people strive, reach, and grow, even when the path was uncertain. In the end, Daedalus realized that Icarus's flight was not just a cautionary tale. It was a celebration of the very spirit of human desire. Icarus had reached for the heavens, and though he had fallen, he had done so with the courage to dream. That, Daedalus thought, was the greatest gift of all. As time passed, the story of Icarus, like so many myths of ancient Greece, evolved, spreading far beyond the shores of Crete. The tale of the boy who flew too high reached the ears of poets, artists, and scholars throughout the Mediterranean, its lessons becoming more and more universal with each retelling. What had once been a personal tragedy for Daedalus now became a powerful allegory, one woven into the larger fabric of myth, culture, and human understanding. Icarus's story became a metaphor for the human experience itself, a tale of boundless ambition, fleeting freedom, and the inevitable limits of human power. The ancient Greeks, with their vast pantheon of gods and heroes, had always celebrated those who dared to challenge the boundaries of their existence. Heroes like Theseus, Heracles, and Perseus were celebrated for their daring feats, their courageous journeys to far-off lands, and their triumphs over monsters and gods alike. Yet Icarus, whose ambition had led him to such a tragic end, was a reminder that the desire for greatness, while noble, could also be perilous. In the centuries that followed, Icarus's myth became woven into the tapestry of Greek thought and philosophy. For thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, the story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess, the dangers of reaching for the unattainable without understanding the risks. Icarus's fall was not merely the result of a boy's rashness, but of a deeper, more universal truth, that the pursuit of greatness without wisdom and moderation could lead to ruin. For the Romans, who inherited much of Greek mythology, the tale of Icarus also took on new dimensions. In their retellings, Icarus became an emblem of youthful exuberance, a figure who sought to transcend the limits of mortal existence. The Romans, with their own complex views on virtue and vice, often saw Icarus not as a tragic figure, but as a symbol of what happens when ambition overrides caution. His flight became an emblem of hubris, a term coined by the Greeks to describe the dangerous overstepping of bounds, often leading to divine punishment. But while Icarus's fall remained a central part of his myth, the tale began to take on more complex meanings over time. In art and literature, Icarus was not simply remembered as a boy who fell from the sky. He came to represent the tragic consequences of living too much in the realm of idealism, of believing that the heavens were within reach, only to be confronted with the crushing realities of human existence. The myth, though tragic, became a source of inspiration for those who sought to understand the limits of human ambition and the boundaries of human power. The Renaissance, a period marked by a resurgence of interest in classical mythology, revived the myth of Icarus in ways that gave the story new life and relevance. The myth was no longer just a tale of one boy's tragic fall, but a narrative that spoke to the heart of human creativity and artistic expression. Artists like Peter Bruegel the Elder began to paint the story of Icarus in vivid detail, capturing the boy's descent into the sea while placing the focus not on Icarus himself, but on the world around him, on the people who, indifferent to his plight, continued with their daily lives. In Bruegel's famous painting, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus, the fall is depicted in the background almost as an afterthought, as the peasants go about their work. The message was clear. While Icarus reached for the heavens, the rest of the world was busy with its own affairs, indifferent to the lofty dreams of one individual. This reinterpretation of the myth reflected a growing understanding that human ambition, though often met with tragic consequences, was also an essential part of the human experience. Icarus, in his moment of flight, had become a symbol of human potential. The belief that one could transcend the limitations of the body, reach for the divine, and experience something beyond the realm of ordinary life. The tragedy of his fall did not erase this potential. It only made it more poignant, more real. Icarus also found his way into the works of modern literature, psychology, and even science fiction. In the 20th century, the myth was revisited by writers like James Joyce and W.H. Auden, who explored its themes of youthful idealism and the crushing weight of failure. The myth resonated with a generation coming to terms with the realities of a world torn apart by war, political turmoil, and the dawning of a new age of technology. Icarus became a figure for those who sought to escape the confines of a world they did not understand, only to find themselves falling short of their goals. In the field of psychology, Icarus was often invoked as a symbol of human overreach, a figure whose desire to escape the limits of his own existence mirrored the psychological need to push boundaries in search of self-actualization. Sigmund Freud, with his theories of repression and the unconscious, found in Icarus a reflection of the tension between the conscious and unconscious mind, between the rational and the irrational, the known and the unknown. Icarus, in his ambition, had sought to transcend the bounds of his own limitations, but in doing so, he had exposed himself to the primal forces of nature and fate. The myth of Icarus also continued to resonate in the 21st century, in the age of space exploration and technological advancement. The desire to reach beyond the Earth, to touch the stars, to travel to new worlds, echoes the same drive that propelled Icarus to the sky. As humanity advances further into the unknown, the myth of Icarus serves as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder of the risks that come with ambition and the need to temper our dreams with wisdom. The story of Icarus is not just a relic of the past. It is a living myth that continues to shape our understanding of human aspiration and the boundaries of possibility. The myth of Icarus, though deeply tragic, has transcended time to become a symbol, not only of youthful exuberance and ambition, but also of the human condition itself. From ancient Greece to modern times, the story of Icarus serves as a mirror to the desires, dreams, and limits of humankind. He is not merely remembered for his fall, but for what he represented, a symbol of the pursuit of greatness, the tension between freedom and control, and the inevitability of consequence. Icarus, in his brief flight, embodied the universal yearning for transcendence, the desire to break free from the chains of earthly existence, to soar into the heavens, to touch the divine. This pursuit is deeply human, woven into the fabric of our species. Every great accomplishment, from the first human flight to space exploration, echoes the same drive that led Icarus to the sky. The myth has, over the centuries, become the archetype of all those who aspire to push the boundaries of their own limitations, to test the limits of their potential. But as with all human endeavors, the story of Icarus also holds the cautionary lesson that the pursuit of greatness, unchecked by wisdom and foresight, can lead to destruction. His flight, daring and beautiful, was ultimately a tragedy, because it was propelled by an ambition that failed to account for the consequences of overreaching. Icarus, in his moment of exhilaration, forgot the lessons of restraint and balance that his father had so carefully imparted. The wings that carried him so high became his undoing because they were designed for a journey that was too great. Icarus' fall, like the falling star or the crash of an airplane, is not simply an accident. It is a representation of a profound truth about the fragility of human aspiration. It speaks to the tension between our dreams and our limitations, between what we believe is possible and the forces that we cannot control. Icarus, soaring toward the sun, became a victim of his own yearning for freedom and greatness, as do many who attempt to achieve the impossible without fully understanding the risks involved. The myth is not just about one boy's tragic fate, but about all of us, about the dreams we chase, the limits we test, and the price we pay when we fail to recognize those limits. It is a story that speaks to the ambition and the courage to take risks, but also to the humility needed to accept the consequences of those risks. Over the centuries, Icarus has become a symbol in art and literature, but also in the world of science and technology. He represents humanity's reach toward the unknown, the instinct to break through barriers, to understand the universe in new ways. The very idea of flight, whether physical or metaphorical, carries the essence of Icarus, an attempt to escape the constraints of earthly existence, to rise above and beyond, to touch the sky. In the age of space exploration, the memory of Icarus looms large as humans continue to venture into the heavens, seeking to conquer the unknown, just as Icarus sought to conquer the sky. The very word Icarus has come to symbolize both greatness and folly. It is often invoked as a reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and humility, between the pursuit of dreams and the wisdom to know when to pull back. Icarus is a figure that resonates with anyone who has ever dared to dream, to reach for something greater than themselves, only to find that the very thing they sought can sometimes be their undoing. But it is also important to remember that Icarus's story is not merely one of tragedy. It is a story of a boy who, in his brief moment of flight, achieved something that few ever do. His ambition, though it led to his fall, was also what allowed him to soar. He became a part of the sky, a part of the universe, if only for a fleeting moment. In that sense, Icarus represents the idea that greatness is not always defined by success, but by the courage to take the leap, to reach for the impossible, even when the outcome is uncertain. Icarus, in his fall, became a part of something larger. He became a symbol not just of human failure, but of human potential, the capacity to imagine, to dream, and to strive toward the heavens, even when the cost is unknown. In this way, Icarus's legacy is not one of doom, but of inspiration. His story encourages us to continue to dream, to continue to reach for what seems impossible, while reminding us that every dream comes with its own set of risks and responsibilities. In the end, Icarus may have fallen, but his flight remains a testament to the power of human ambition, to the courage to reach for the sun. He may not have survived, but in his brief journey, he touched the heavens, and in that touch, he gave us something eternal, the desire to soar, to push beyond our limits, and to continue reaching for the sky, no matter the cost. The myth of Icarus endures, not merely because of its tragic ending, but because it holds profound lessons about the human condition. The story of the boy who dared to fly too close to the sun serves as a mirror to the very ambitions, desires, and limitations that define humanity. In the flights of gods and heroes throughout mythology, Icarus's journey stands as a cautionary tale, but also a universal reflection on the nature of dreams and the consequences of reaching beyond one's grasp. Flight, in myth, has always symbolized both the ultimate freedom and the ultimate challenge. From Daedalus's wings to the chariots of Apollo, The gods themselves were often depicted soaring through the heavens beyond the reach of mortals. To fly was to be divine, to transcend the confines of the earth and experience a freedom that was unimaginable to those grounded in human existence. In the myths, flight is often portrayed as a divine gift, a power bestowed upon those who are worthy, such as the great heroes or gods themselves. But in the case of Icarus, flight became not a gift, but a burden, a tragic consequence of unchecked ambition. Icarus, much like the gods whose flight represented divine power, believed that he too could transcend human limitations. His attempt to reach the sun was not just an act of rebellion, but a deep, instinctual desire to rise above the ordinary, to be more than just mortal. In that desire, he represented every person who has ever dreamt of greatness and achievement, every person who has ever pushed the boundaries of what is considered possible. However, Icarus's fall teaches a crucial lesson. The pursuit of freedom, of greatness, must be tempered by wisdom and humility. While the gods might soar freely, human flight comes with limitations, limitations that must be understood and respected. The story of Icarus shows that there are consequences to ambition if it lacks the grounding influence of wisdom, caution, and self-awareness. It is one thing to dream, to reach, and to aspire. It is another to do so without the ability to recognize when one has reached their limit. In the context of Greek mythology, the theme of flight appears in many forms. Daedalus, in creating the wings for himself and Icarus, demonstrated the power of human ingenuity, the capacity to make the impossible possible. But the very act of flight also carries with it a dangerous duality. Daedalus himself had been a man of knowledge and creation, but his invention ultimately led to his son's death, a stark reminder that even the most brilliant inventions can bring about unintended consequences. Furthermore, Icarus's fall is a lesson about balance, about the need for moderation in every pursuit. His father, Daedalus, had warned him to fly neither too high nor too low, but Icarus, swept away by the thrill of flight, ignored this counsel. This imbalance between aspiration and caution is something that appears in many mythological tales. The gods, too, demonstrate this imbalance when they push too far, too fast, only to be brought down by their own arrogance. In Icarus's case, his desire to reach the sun, symbolizing his ultimate ambition, resulted in his undoing, just as the gods' pride often led to their downfall. The myth also echoes the idea that freedom comes at a cost. To be free is to be unbound by earthly limitations, but it is also to be vulnerable. Icarus, in his flight, was free from the ground, free from the constraints of his father's warnings. But this freedom was fleeting. The tragedy of his fall lies in the fact that, for all his liberation, he did not understand the price of his flight. Freedom, in its purest form, is often dangerous. Just as great power comes with the potential for great destruction. Icarus's flight also speaks to the idea of human potential, of striving for greatness and the dangers of pursuing something greater than oneself. Icarus's yearning to touch the sun, to achieve the unattainable, is a reflection of the innate human drive to push boundaries and explore the unknown. This drive is often what drives humanity to achieve great feats, like the exploration of space, the building of empires, or the creation of art. It is this drive that leads to both the highest achievements and the most tragic falls. In this, Icarus is not just a figure of myth. He is a symbol of every person who has ever dreamed of achieving something greater than themselves, only to be confronted with the cost of that dream. The myth of Icarus, in its enduring relevance, continues to speak to the tension between aspiration and limitation. The flight of Icarus teaches us that while we should never stop dreaming, we must also understand our limitations. The gods, who can fly unimpeded, represent a form of power that is unattainable for mortals. But in attempting to mirror the divine, Icarus reminds us that there are consequences for defying the natural order, and that sometimes the pursuit of greatness must be tempered by the wisdom to know when to stop. The story of Icarus also serves as a reminder that even in failure there is meaning. While Icarus's fall is a tragic one, it is also a symbol of the pursuit itself, the courage to reach for the impossible. In his brief flight, Icarus achieved something that few others could. He soared higher than anyone before him, touched the very sun, and, for a brief moment, became a part of something divine. His fall, while tragic, became the symbol of every attempt to overcome the limitations of the human body and spirit. The pursuit of flight, the search for transcendence, is not about the outcome, but about the attempt itself, the courage to reach, to strive, and to dream. The story of Icarus, like all great myths, has endured across the ages because it resonates with something eternal in human nature. Over time, the myth has taken on new layers of meaning, adapting to the shifting concerns and aspirations of each era. In the modern age, as humanity has reached new heights, literally and figuratively, the myth of Icarus finds itself more relevant than ever, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reflection of our own ambitions and the price we pay for pushing the boundaries of what is possible. In the modern world, Icarus has become a symbol not just of youthful arrogance, but of the unrelenting drive for progress that defines much of human history. From the first flight of the Wright brothers to the moon landing, to today's ongoing efforts to explore Mars, Icarus's myth is reflected in our relentless pursuit of flight, space exploration, and technological advancement. Every time we stretch our limits, whether in science, art, or human achievement, we see echoes of Icarus in our own endeavors. The idea of reaching beyond the Earth to the stars, of flying higher and farther than anyone before, carries with it the same spirit that Icarus embodied. In the 20th and 21st centuries, this drive has taken humanity to new heights, quite literally. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union in the mid-20th century was an embodiment of Icarus's flight, with both nations pushing the boundaries of human potential, just as Icarus sought to surpass the limits of human flight. In this context, Icarus is not just a tragic figure, but a symbol of the courage to aim for the impossible, to embrace the unknown, even when the risks are great. However, the myth is also a warning that remains relevant. As humanity pushes ever outward, exploring new frontiers in space, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology, the lessons of Icarus remain crucial. In our ambition to overcome our limitations, to conquer the forces of nature and defy death itself, we must ask, what is the cost? Icarus's fall reminds us that even the greatest accomplishments carry risks, and that unchecked ambition can lead to downfall. In our search for freedom from earthly constraints, we must remember the importance of balance, the very lesson Daedalus tried to teach his son. As we venture into unknown territories, we must be mindful of the consequences of overreaching. The myth of Icarus has also found its way into contemporary discussions of technology, ethics, and the human desire for progress. As we develop technologies that allow us to manipulate our environment, extend our lives, and perhaps even transcend the biological limitations of the human body, the story of Icarus takes on a new significance. In our quest for immortality or superhuman abilities, are we in danger of flying too close to the sun? In the field of genetic engineering, for example, scientists are making breakthroughs that could change the course of human evolution. Yet, much like Icarus, there is a risk that we may push too far without fully understanding the consequences. Similarly, in the realm of artificial intelligence, we are creating machines that surpass human intellect and capability. These advancements promise great benefits, but they also carry the potential for unintended consequences. Icarus's myth serves as a stark reminder that in the pursuit of power, whether in the form of intellectual prowess, physical prowess, or technological mastery, we must exercise caution and wisdom. Even in the most promising of scientific endeavors, the limits of our knowledge and understanding must be respected. In art and culture, Icarus remains a powerful symbol of the tension between aspiration and limitation. The image of Icarus, wings flapping as he rises toward the heavens, continues to be a potent metaphor for the human condition. Artists, poets, and filmmakers have drawn upon this myth to explore themes of ambition, freedom, and the inevitable fall. In the works of modern artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat, who often explored themes of struggle and transcendence, Icarus's figure appears as a symbol of both hope and despair, an embodiment of the drive to break free, even when the consequences are unknown. In literature, Icarus's story has been reimagined in countless ways. Writers like W.H. Auden and James Joyce have used the myth to explore the human pursuit of meaning and the inherent limitations of the human spirit. For Arden, Icarus's fall in his poem Musée des Beaux-Arts serves as a reflection on the indifference of the world to individual tragedy. The peasants who go about their work in Bruegel's famous painting of Icarus's fall are a metaphor for the way in which the world continues, indifferent to the dreams and failures of individuals. Joyce, in Ulysses, uses the figure of Icarus to explore themes of ambition, identity, and the human need to transcend the mundane. For all its tragic elements, the myth of Icarus is ultimately a symbol of hope. In Icarus's flight, there is an affirmation of the human spirit, an affirmation that we, as humans, are capable of reaching for the stars, of breaking free from our limitations, of dreaming of what seems impossible. The fall, though inevitable, does not negate the achievement of the flight itself. For all of his youthful recklessness, Icarus dared to dream, and in that dream he became something greater than himself. His flight, brief as it was, remains an emblem of the possibility of transcendence, the power of the human will to reach for the divine. And in our own modern times, as we stand on the precipice of new frontiers, whether in space exploration, artificial intelligence, or genetic engineering, Icarus's legacy continues to inspire us to reach higher, to strive further. But it also calls on us to be mindful of the risks, to temper our ambitions with caution, and to remember that even in the pursuit of the greatest dreams, we must never forget the lessons of the past. As the myth of Icarus continues to echo through the generations, one theme remains constant: the tension between the wisdom of restraint and the impulse for boundless ambition. Despite the lessons of Daedalus and the tragic end of Icarus, humanity has time and again found itself repeating the same mistakes. Driven by the desire to reach beyond the limits, to fly too high, and to ignore the warnings that come with such daring aspirations. In the myth, Daedalus's warning to Icarus is simple but profound. Do not fly too high or too low. The admonition is clear. A balanced course is the safest. Yet Icarus, swept up by the thrill of flight and the allure of the sun, disregards his father's wisdom and, in doing so, seals his fate. His tragic fall serves as a poignant reminder that the greatest ambitions often come with the highest risks. And without the wisdom to temper those ambitions, one is left vulnerable to the very forces they seek to control. As much as Icarus's myth is about the dangers of excess and unchecked ambition, it also speaks to the universal human experience of being drawn to what is beyond one's reach. Time and again, people have disregarded the cautionary advice of others in the pursuit of their dreams. It is in the pursuit of the unattainable that many find their greatest achievements and greatest failures. In the context of the myth, the sun represents not only the ultimate symbol of aspiration and power, but also the most dangerous force. Icarus's desire to rise above the world and touch the heavens is an archetype of the human desire to transcend earthly limitations. to reach a state of divinity or immortality. The sun is both the symbol of his greatest dream and the catalyst for his destruction. Just as the gods are often depicted as distant, unreachable beings, the sun serves as a metaphor for those aspirations that, while noble, are simply out of reach for mortals. The warnings Icarus receives from Daedalus are not just practical, they are philosophical. To fly too high is to ignore one's place in the world, to believe that one can overcome the natural order without consequence. To fly too low is to be burdened by the mundane, to give in to the limitations of the earth and its physical laws. Daedalus's advice is an attempt to encourage balance, to seek greatness without ignoring the boundaries that exist for a reason. Icarus's refusal to heed this advice underscores the folly of youthful exuberance, the impulse to push forward without considering the cost. In modern times, this dynamic continues to unfold in ways both large and small. From the relentless pursuit of technological advancements to the quest for social and economic superiority, there are countless examples of individuals, groups, and entire nations disregarding the warnings that come with unchecked ambition. The pursuit of immortality, the desire to break free from the confines of nature, and the temptation to manipulate the forces that govern our world. All of these echo Icarus's flight as humanity continues to push for more without fully considering the consequences. In the realm of technology, the rapid development of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and genetic engineering reflects this same desire to transcend our limitations. As scientists and engineers reach for new heights, they must be mindful of the lessons of Icarus. For every advancement that promises to elevate humanity, there are risks that must not be ignored. The power to create life, to manipulate genetics, and to control the very fabric of nature carries with it the potential for unintended consequences. The story of Icarus reminds us that ambition, while often the driving force behind great achievements, must be tempered by wisdom and caution. We cannot afford to ignore the potential pitfalls of our own creations. Similarly, the pursuit of space exploration continues to be one of humanity's most ambitious endeavors. The drive to explore new frontiers, to reach beyond the confines of Earth, is rooted in the same spirit that propelled Icarus into the sky. But just as Icarus's flight was fueled by the desire to reach the sun, our own drive to explore space must be tempered by the understanding that the unknown holds both the promise of discovery and the danger of unforeseen consequences. As we venture into the cosmos, we must remember that the universe is vast and indifferent, and that reaching too far without understanding the risks can lead to our undoing. Icarus's fall is not just a warning about the dangers of ambition, but a reminder of the importance of balance in all things. It is not enough to simply chase after the unattainable. We must also be mindful of the price we may pay for that pursuit. This is the core of Daedalus's wisdom. Ambition is valuable, but it must be tempered with caution, humility, and self-awareness. The myth of Icarus also serves as a reflection on the fleeting nature of human achievement. Icarus's flight, brief as it was, represents the fragility of human dreams and the transient nature of success. Though he reached the heights of the sky, his fall was swift, and his moment of glory was short-lived. In this way, Icarus serves as a symbol of all human endeavors, those moments of greatness that seem to promise immortality, only to fade away in the face of time and the inevitable forces of nature. The lesson here is that we should not only strive for greatness, but also recognize the impermanence of our achievements and the importance of embracing the journey rather than merely the destination. Icarus's story is ultimately a story of humanity itself, a tale of striving, falling, and learning. It is a myth that continues to resonate, reminding us that while we may reach for the stars, we must never forget the wisdom that guides us, nor the consequences of overreaching. The fall of Icarus is not the end of his story. It is a continuation of the lessons he imparts, lessons that will continue to be relevant for as long as humanity dares to dream. Throughout history, the myth of Icarus has served as a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach, the inherent dangers of ambition when it is not tempered by caution, wisdom, and self-awareness. In every age, as humanity strives to achieve greatness, the lesson of Icarus remains as relevant as ever. The pursuit of the unattainable, while noble in its aspiration, can lead to inevitable failure if not carefully managed. At the heart of Icarus's myth is the fundamental truth that all human achievements, whether in the arts, sciences, or political endeavors, are fraught with risks. The desire to transcend, to break through barriers and reach new heights is what drives progress. Yet, in this drive, there is always the danger of crossing into the realm of hubris, the overestimation of one's ability to control the forces at play. Icarus' flight toward the sun, his disregard for his father's warnings, can be seen as a metaphor for every human attempt to conquer nature, fate, or the divine. From the first fire lit by early humans to the space exploration that has defined the modern era, each leap forward has come with a promise of new frontiers, but also with the shadow of danger. Icarus, who sought to break free of the constraints of his world and soar above it, serves as a reminder that even the greatest of dreams can come crashing down if they are not pursued with humility. This concept of overreach is not confined to the realm of mythology. In the political and social spheres, the history of empires and nations is replete with examples of overreach. The ambition to control vast territories, to dominate others, to impose one's will on the world. From Alexander the Great to Napoleon Bonaparte, history is marked by figures whose desire for conquest led to their downfall. In their ambition to reach too far, they lost the very essence of their power and ultimately brought ruin upon themselves. In the modern world, overreach can be seen in the economic and technological spheres. The pursuit of unchecked growth, the desire to dominate markets, and the race to control resources have led to environmental destruction, social inequality, and economic crises. Icarus's fall is not just the story of a boy who soared too high. It is the story of humanity's tendency to push forward, to reach for more, without fully considering the consequences. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, was the result of unchecked ambition in the global banking system. A desire to reach for profits beyond what was sustainable, which ultimately led to global collapse. Even in the realm of technology, the myth of Icarus continues to resonate. With each new innovation, we push the boundaries of what is possible. From the creation of artificial intelligence to the manipulation of genetics, we are constantly reaching for more, aiming to transcend the limitations of the human body and mind. But in this pursuit, we must ask ourselves, what are the costs of overreach? Just as Icarus's wings were weakened by the sun, our technological advancements can sometimes have unintended and irreversible consequences. The pursuit of immortality, the creation of sentient machines, and the manipulation of life itself raise profound ethical questions about our place in the natural order. The development of AI and biotechnology presents an obvious modern parallel to the myth. In striving for greater intelligence, efficiency, and power, we risk creating systems and entities that may surpass our control. The idea of creating artificial intelligence with capabilities greater than our own can be seen as a contemporary form of Icarus's flight. The desire to push the boundaries of human potential through technology carries with it the risk of losing control over what we have created. As Icarus learned, even the greatest ambitions can be undone by forces beyond our control. Whether it be the heat of the sun or the unpredictable consequences of unchecked technological power. The question then is not whether we should strive for greatness, but how we should approach it. Icarus' tragedy lies not in his ambition, but in his disregard for the wisdom of restraint. His flight represents the human desire to break free from the mundane, to rise above the ordinary and touch something divine. But the myth also reminds us that we cannot do so without acknowledging the risks, without understanding the limits of what is possible, and without being prepared for the consequences of overreach. In the pursuit of great dreams, whether personal or collective, there must be a balance. It is not enough to simply aim for the sun. We must also recognize the fragility of our wings. The myth of Icarus invites us to dream big, but to do so with awareness of the limits that exist. We must understand that the greater the dream, the greater the responsibility that comes with it. The most successful achievements in human history have not come from reckless ambition, but from the wisdom to balance dream with reality, vision with caution, and power with humility. Icarus, in his fall, reminds us of the importance of tempering our greatest ambitions with a sense of responsibility, both to ourselves and to the world around us. His flight teaches us that greatness is not about defying nature or fate, but about understanding the forces we face, recognizing our limitations, and striving toward our goals with the wisdom to know when to pull back. The myth of Icarus resonates most deeply with the young, the dreamers, the adventurers who are unafraid to aim high, to seek out the impossible, and to believe in their own boundless potential. His flight embodies the very essence of youthful ambition, the innate desire to break free from constraints and to reach beyond what is known. For Icarus, the sky was not a limit. It was an invitation, a call to something greater than what his earthly existence had offered him. Youth, in its essence, is a time of ambition untempered by experience. It is a time when dreams feel vast and unachievable things seem within reach. Icarus, in his moment of flight, represents this purity of ambition, the kind that believes, even if momentarily, that the impossible can be achieved. His leap toward the sun, a godlike pursuit, is as much about innocence as it is about courage. He has no concept of the consequences of his actions, no understanding of the fragility of his wings, the limitations of his human nature. All he knows is the exhilaration of soaring, of rising above, of feeling the wind beneath his wings and the sun above him. In this sense, Icarus becomes a symbol not of failure, but of youthful exuberance. His fall, though tragic, is inevitable, the result of the very nature of youth, which is often driven by impulse, emotion, and a sense of invincibility. Young people often believe they can conquer the world, and it is only through experience that they come to understand their limits. This tension between the boundless optimism of youth and the eventual reality of adulthood is at the heart of Icarus's story. The tragedy lies not just in his fall, but in the brief moment of freedom he experienced, the fleeting sense of power and potential that only youth can understand. As a symbol of youth, Icarus represents the hope and the danger of unbridled ambition. The myth speaks to the way young people approach their dreams and goals with a kind of reckless abandon, believing that anything is possible, unaware of the consequences that may follow. The gods, who lived without the same limitations as mortals, could soar freely. But for Icarus, bound by the fragility of the human body and the limits of his wings, the very act of flight was a risk. His ambition, though noble, lacked the wisdom that comes only with age and experience. In this way, Icarus represents the youthful dreamer who must learn, often the hard way, that the pursuit of greatness comes with responsibility. The myth is a mirror for those who, in the flush of youth, see no boundaries. It is a call to the young, to those who believe they can rise above the constraints of the world and defy the rules. It is a story about aspiration, about hope, and about the painful process of coming to terms with the realities of life. Icarus's flight is beautiful, even in its tragedy, because it encapsulates the spirit of youth, the desire to reach for the heavens, to make the impossible possible, and to transcend the limits that others impose. Yet the myth also serves as a reminder to those who are young that while ambition is important, it must be tempered with wisdom. Icarus, in his pursuit of the sun, failed to recognize the fragility of the very wings that had granted him his flight. Youth, in its search for freedom and greatness, is often blinded by its own vision, by the sheer force of its dreams. But the lesson of Icarus is one of balance. To soar, yes, but to do so with an understanding of one's limitations. The journey to greatness must be navigated carefully. For while dreams are what fuel progress, they must not be pursued blindly. As Icarus falls, the myth teaches the young that their ambitions, though noble, should not come at the expense of their own well-being or their future. The lesson is not to abandon dreams or to avoid ambition, but to recognize the need for caution, preparation, and humility. Icarus, in his brief flight, showed the world the beauty of soaring, but he also showed the price of failing to understand the limits of his own wings. The myth speaks to the universal experience of growing up, of learning from one's mistakes, of realizing that the world is not as simple as it once seemed, and of gaining the wisdom to temper dreams with reality. As we grow older, we often find that the ambitions of youth, though still precious, must be balanced with the understanding that greatness requires more than just desire. It requires foresight, care, and an understanding of the forces that surround us. Icarus may have flown too high, but in doing so, he left behind a lesson that endures, that the beauty of ambition is not just in the flight, but in knowing when to pull back before the fall. For the young, Icarus is a figure to be admired, but also to be learned from. His ambition is a call to reach, to stretch, to believe in the impossible. But his fall reminds the dreamers that the pursuit of greatness must always be tempered by wisdom, caution, and self-awareness. Icarus's myth is, in the end, not just a story of a boy who fell from the sky, but a reflection on the journey of youth itself. A journey of soaring high, dreaming big, and eventually coming to understand the price of those dreams. As Daedalus grew older, the weight of his grief and his genius continued to shape his existence. Though the world revered him for his inventions, the labyrinth, the wings, and countless other feats of ingenuity, there was an unmistakable quiet sadness in his eyes, an echo of the tragic loss of his son, Icarus. The sorrow of losing his child could never be alleviated by the adulation of kings or the praise of scholars. It was a loss too deep to be soothed by fame or recognition. In his mind, no creation, no achievement could ever compare to the dream that had been cut short by his son's fall. Daedalus had once been a man driven by a desire to create, to craft, to shape the world with his hands. His brilliant mind had given birth to the labyrinth, a marvel of engineering and a symbol of his unparalleled genius. But after Icarus's death, his purpose shifted. What had once been an unrelenting pursuit of invention became, in the wake of tragedy, a more somber and reflective endeavor. Daedalus no longer worked simply for the joy of creation, but as a way to come to terms with the painful truth that even the greatest works of human ingenuity carry with them the possibility of destruction. The loss of Icarus had been a lesson in the fragility of human ambition. Daedalus, who had once seen the world as a place to be shaped and conquered, now saw it through the lens of the delicate balance between creation and collapse. The wings, once a symbol of freedom, were now a painful reminder of the consequences of pushing too far, of believing that the human spirit could rise above the natural limits that govern all things. Daedalus had crafted the wings to carry his son to freedom, but in doing so, he had inadvertently set the stage for Icarus's fall. But the myth of Daedalus, like the myth of Icarus, is not solely about tragedy. It is also a reflection of the complexity of the human spirit, the capacity for both brilliance and failure, for creation and destruction. Daedalus was not merely the father who lost his son, nor the inventor whose creations led to disaster. He was a man who, like all great creators, grappled with the consequences of his genius, the burden of responsibility that comes with the power to shape the world. In the years that followed, Daedalus traveled from place to place, continuing to share his knowledge with kings, engineers, and artists. His fame spread, but his heart remained heavy with the grief of his son's loss. There were moments in the solitude of his workshops, or as he gazed out over the sea where Icarus had fallen, when he would remember the boy he had once loved so dearly. In those moments, Daedalus understood that the wings, though a brilliant creation, were incomplete without the wisdom to temper ambition. The lesson that he had learned too late to save his son, was one that he would carry with him until the end of his days. Daedalus's work took on a new form. Though he continued to build, to invent, and to teach, there was now an element of reflection in everything he did. He no longer crafted with the hope of reaching for the stars or transcending the limits of humanity. Instead, he worked with the knowledge that creation must always be accompanied by an understanding of the cost. The greatest inventions, the greatest dreams, must be weighed against the consequences of their pursuit. In the quiet corners of his workshops, Daedalus would reflect on the lessons of his life. The wings, though broken, had taught him something profound: that human ambition must always be grounded in the reality of its limitations. The myth of Icarus was not just a tragedy. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between greatness and humility, between creation and destruction. Daedalus had created the wings to give his son the world, but in the end, he had learned that the world must be approached with respect and caution. To dream is to reach, but to soar without understanding the risks is to fall. Though Daedalus never fully recovered from the loss of Icarus, he did find some solace in the way his son's myth lived on, in the way it became a lesson to others. Icarus's fall had not been in vain. It had become a story that would teach future generations the value of wisdom, caution, and restraint. Daedalus could take some comfort in knowing that his son's legacy had become a part of something greater than himself, a part of the tapestry of human understanding, a symbol of both the heights to which we can rise and the depths to which we can fall. Daedalus had spent his life creating, but in the end, it was not his creations that defined him. It was the way he had grappled with the cost of creation, with the wisdom that must accompany greatness. In the tragedy of Icarus, Daedalus found not just grief, but the greatest lesson of all, that the pursuit of the extraordinary must always be tempered by the wisdom to know when to stop, when to turn back, and when to acknowledge the fragility of our own desires. As the myth of Icarus continued to unfold over centuries, it transcended its origin as a tragic tale of ambition and loss. It became more than a mere story of a boy who flew too close to the sun. In the minds of thinkers, artists, and dreamers alike, the myth evolved into a powerful symbol, a mirror of the human condition, an exploration of the risks and rewards of reaching for the unattainable, and a reminder of the delicate balance between dreams and reality. The enduring power of the Icarus myth lies not just in its tragedy, but in its universal themes of aspiration, failure, and the price of greatness. Icarus's flight represents the boldness of human ambition, the relentless drive to overcome the limitations of our earthly existence, to touch the divine, and to transcend the constraints of the world. His fall, while tragic, is part of the human experience, the inevitable consequence of daring to reach for more. Icarus embodies that most quintessential human desire, the longing to escape the mundane, to break free of the bonds of mortality, and to achieve something extraordinary. This impulse is one that spans cultures and eras. From the ancient myths of Greece to the modern-day quest for immortality through technology, the desire to transcend, to reach beyond ourselves, is universal. Icarus's story resonates with anyone who has ever dreamed of something greater, of soaring above the ordinary, of achieving what others might consider impossible. But the myth of Icarus also serves as a warning, one that speaks to the limitations inherent in all human endeavors. Icarus's flight was a moment of pure ambition, but it was also a moment of blind overreach. His tragic fall reminds us that while dreaming big is a vital part of human progress, it is equally important to remain grounded in reality. Ambition without understanding, without wisdom, without restraint, can lead to downfall. Icarus did not heed his father's warnings, and in doing so, he fell from the heights he had so briefly attained. This theme of overreach, the dangers of pursuing dreams without considering the risks, is one that resonates deeply in the modern world. From the early pioneers of flight to the current efforts in space exploration, humanity has continued to strive for the impossible. But just as Icarus learned the limits of his wings, we too must recognize the limits of our own creations and our ambitions. The pursuit of space, for example, represents the modern-day equivalent of Icarus's flight, a reaching for the stars, a desire to break free from the constraints of our planet. And yet, even in this pursuit, we must be mindful of the dangers of overreaching, of forgetting the fragility of our human existence, and of the risks that come with pushing the boundaries of what we know. But the power of myth lies not just in its warnings. It is in the lessons it teaches, the truths it uncovers about human nature, and the universal themes it speaks to. The Icarus myth continues to inspire and challenge, providing a lens through which we can reflect on our own desires, dreams, and the costs of those pursuits. It is a myth that, while grounded in ancient Greek culture, speaks to the modern soul just as clearly. It reminds us that in our pursuit of greatness, we must always ask ourselves, what are we willing to risk? And are we prepared for the consequences? The myth of Icarus also teaches us about the nature of failure. In Icarus's fall, we see not just the result of ambition gone awry, but also a reflection of the human condition itself. Failure is an inevitable part of the journey. To aim high, to dream big, is to risk failure. And yet, it is through failure that we often find the greatest lessons, the most profound insights into our limitations and our potential. Icarus's fall, though tragic, is also a poignant reminder that even in our failures, we achieve something. We learn, we grow, and we come to understand our place in the world. In this way, the myth of Icarus serves as a reminder that the pursuit of greatness is not about achieving perfection, but about striving towards something beyond ourselves, knowing full well that the journey is fraught with risks. The fall of Icarus, tragic as it is, represents the very heart of the human spirit. The courage to reach, the strength to dream, and the resilience to rise again, even after we have fallen. As the myth of Icarus endures, its power continues to be felt in art, literature, philosophy, and in the everyday aspirations of individuals. The tale of the boy who flew too high has become a timeless symbol of the human struggle to transcend the boundaries of the earth and to reach for the stars. And while his fall reminds us of the risks inherent in ambition, it also affirms the beauty of dreaming, of soaring towards something greater, no matter the cost. Icarus's fall, despite its tragic nature, holds a powerful message, not just about the dangers of ambition, but also about the indomitable spirit of the human race. The wings he wore, crafted by his father, were symbols of human ingenuity, of the drive to push beyond what seems possible. While his flight was short-lived, it serves as a reminder of the intrinsic nature of humankind. To dream, to explore, and to reach for something greater than the world we know. Icarus's flight becomes emblematic of the very essence of the human spirit. To take risks, to seek freedom, and to pursue dreams that often seem beyond our reach. It is essential to acknowledge that the wings Daedalus created were not simply functional. They represented an act of faith. They were a gift from a father to his son, designed to give him the opportunity to escape the labyrinth, to escape his confinement, and to experience freedom. These wings, made from feathers, wax, and string, were fragile, but they were also magnificent in their simplicity and their potential. They symbolized a brief moment of unrestrained possibility. The wings represent something deeper as well. In many ways, they are a metaphor for the human capacity to transcend earthly limitations, to imagine and create something that changes the course of history. Humanity, throughout time, has built countless wings in the form of inventions, art, philosophy, and ideas. Each of these represents the striving for something greater: freedom, enlightenment, connection, or understanding. The pursuit of these goals often brings us closer to the ideal we seek, just as Icarus drew closer to the sun. But it also carries with it the risk of failure, the possibility that our wings may falter and that we may fall. This dichotomy is at the heart of the human experience. Even in the face of failure, there is something undeniably beautiful about the pursuit itself. Icarus, in his brief flight, achieved what few could ever dream of. He broke free of the limitations of his world, of the boundaries that confined him to the ground. His flight was, if only for a moment, an affirmation of the limitless potential of the human spirit. While the tragedy of his fall cannot be ignored, we must not forget the wonder of his flight. To dream, to aspire, to reach for something greater is to live fully, to embrace both the risks and the rewards of existence. Throughout history, humanity has continued to build its own metaphorical wings, constantly seeking to rise above the confines of what is known. From the exploration of space to the technological innovations of the modern era, each new step forward is an attempt to reach beyond the ordinary, to break free from the limitations that define us. The wings of Daedalus, though tragically worn by Icarus, live on in every aspiration, every innovation, and every dream of progress. The quest for flight, both literal and figurative, has been a driving force in human civilization. In the 20th century, humans achieved the dream that had long been reserved for the gods: the ability to fly. The Wright brothers, pioneers of aviation, brought humanity one step closer to the sky. Their success, born of innovation and ambition, echoed the same desire that led Icarus to take flight. The metaphor of wings, once confined to myth, became real, tangible. And just as Icarus's flight represents the aspiration to transcend, the very act of flight, whether in the air or in our imagination, carries with it the same balance of wonder and risk. Human progress has always been marked by the desire to transcend the ordinary. Whether in the realms of art, science, or philosophy, the quest to expand human potential is part of what drives us forward. But, as the story of Icarus reminds us, this pursuit must be tempered with awareness. We must understand the forces we are working with and be mindful of our limitations. To dream is essential, but to dream with the wisdom of our human frailty is equally important. In the world of modern technology, Icarus's flight lives on. As we continue to develop AI, explore outer space, and innovate in countless fields, we must remember that with great power comes great responsibility. The wings we build, whether technological, intellectual, or social, carry us forward, but they also leave us vulnerable. The very pursuit of greatness that drives us to take flight is the same force that can cause our wings to falter. The story of Icarus, though ancient, continues to resonate in our efforts to conquer the unknown. The modern world offers us countless opportunities to take flight, to test the limits of our capabilities. But it is also a world where ambition can lead to dangerous consequences if it is pursued without caution. Just as Icarus soared toward the sun, we too are drawn toward the unattainable, driven by the belief that we can overcome any obstacle. Yet, like Icarus, we must remember the fragility of our wings and the importance of maintaining a steady course. In the end, the beauty of flight lies not just in the soaring, but in the wisdom to navigate the journey. Icarus's story is not one of pure tragedy. It is a celebration of the human spirit and its capacity to dream. His flight, though brief, represents the very essence of striving for something greater. The wings, though imperfect and fragile, allowed him to rise above the earth, to experience something sublime, even if only for a moment. The myth of Icarus challenges us to keep dreaming, to keep reaching for the sun, while understanding the importance of balance, caution, and wisdom along the way. The story of Icarus, as it has echoed through the centuries, has left an indelible mark, not only on the mythological landscape, but on the human psyche. As we near the end of this journey, it is important to reflect on the lasting legacy of Icarus, not just as a figure of tragedy, but as a symbol of all that is beautiful, courageous, and ultimately fragile in human aspiration. His myth, though it begins with the tragic fall, speaks to the very core of what it means to be human, to dream, to reach, and to strive against the odds. Icarus's legacy lies not in the fall itself, but in the flight. In the brief moments that he soared toward the sun, Icarus touched something that few ever do. His ambition was pure and full of promise, a testament to the power of the human will to overcome barriers, to transcend the earth, and to reach for something greater. Though his flight ended in disaster, those moments of soaring represent the courage to reach beyond oneself, to risk everything in the pursuit of freedom. The myth of Icarus, serves as a metaphor for the quest for human excellence. It is about striving to exceed the limitations of the ordinary and the tangible, and about the great potential that lies in human creativity and ambition. His flight, though short, was extraordinary in its intensity. In those moments, Icarus was no longer a mere mortal. He was a being on the cusp of the divine, reaching toward the heavens themselves. But like all human endeavors, this extraordinary potential is tempered by the vulnerability inherent in any great pursuit. Icarus, in his flight, was not just embracing freedom, but also courting disaster. The same ambition that allowed him to rise to such heights also blinded him to the dangers surrounding him. His fall reminds us that even the loftiest dreams can lead to tragic ends when the necessary wisdom and restraint are not applied. And so, as Icarus's myth continues to be passed down through the ages, it is not just the lessons of failure that resonate, but the message of human perseverance and the ever-present tension between reaching for the impossible and recognizing our own limitations. The world may have witnessed his fall, but in his brief flight, Icarus showed the world what it means to pursue greatness, to chase a dream with every ounce of one's being. His story teaches that even in the face of inevitable consequence, the pursuit of something greater than ourselves is a pursuit worth undertaking. As the world continues to evolve, the myth of Icarus remains as relevant as ever. From space exploration to personal ambition, the desire to reach beyond what we know and understand has driven much of human progress. Icarus continues to inspire those who dare to dream big, to aim high, and to challenge the boundaries of what is possible. His flight is a reminder of the beauty that lies in pursuing one's dreams, even when the outcome is uncertain. Icarus's legacy also underscores the importance of balance, of recognizing the limits of one's ambition and respecting the forces at play. The wings that Daedalus created were a marvel of human ingenuity, but they were not invincible. They were fragile, much like the very nature of human aspiration. The sun, in its brilliance, could melt the wax that held the wings together, just as the unchecked ambition of Icarus eventually led to his downfall. The legacy of Icarus teaches that the pursuit of greatness must be grounded in self-awareness, humility, and the recognition that every action carries with it a consequence. Yet, even in his fall, Icarus remains an eternal symbol of human hope, of the belief that we can defy the odds, soar above the earth, and touch something greater than ourselves. His tragedy does not negate the beauty of his flight. It highlights instead the profound nature of human dreams, the way in which the desire to rise above our limitations can bring both greatness and sorrow. Icarus's story also continues to be retold in literature, art, and culture as a way of processing the deeper truths of human existence. The story of a boy who defied the laws of nature and reached for the heavens resonates with every generation. His myth is a testament to the human need to explore, to break free, and to chase the impossible. It serves as both an inspiration and a warning, a call to dream big while recognizing the need to tread carefully in the pursuit of our goals. Even as the world around us changes, even as we continue to dream of reaching the stars, the story of Icarus remains a timeless reflection of the human spirit. His flight will always be remembered, not just for its tragic end, but for the very fact that he dared to fly at all. And so, as the myth of Icarus reaches its conclusion, we are left with more than just the memory of a boy who dared to fly. The story of Icarus, though wrapped in tragedy, speaks to something timeless and universal in the human experience. The eternal struggle between ambition and consequence, between the desire to transcend and the reality of our limitations. His myth serves as a powerful reminder that even in the face of failure, the pursuit of greatness is what defines the human spirit. Icarus, in his brief flight, achieved something that few could ever dream of. He soared for a moment higher than any mortal ever had, driven by the desire to break free, to touch something divine. His flight, brief as it was a triumph of human will. The will to reach beyond the earth, to defy the forces that govern us, and to seek something greater than the ordinary. But in that very ambition lay the seed of his downfall, as he flew too close to the sun, blinded by the desire for something even higher, even more unattainable. In the end, Icarus's myth is not just a story of hubris, but a reflection on the very nature of human desire. It speaks to the way in which we, as individuals and as a species, are always striving to exceed the limitations of our world. We are driven by the need to achieve, to explore, to understand, and to transcend. Whether it's the desire to conquer new lands, to invent, to explore the stars, or simply to reach for something beyond our grasp, the spirit of Icarus lives on in every dream and every ambition we hold. Icarus's fall, tragic as it was, does not erase the beauty of his flight. In fact, it serves to highlight the importance of the journey, not just the destination. The story teaches us that while we may stumble, fall, and face challenges along the way, the very act of striving towards something greater is what shapes us, what makes us human. Icarus's flight is a symbol of the courage to reach beyond what is known, to dare to dream, and to embrace the possibility of failure as part of the process of growth. The myth of Icarus continues to inspire us, even today. It speaks to our deepest aspirations and our most profound fears. The desire to rise above, and the understanding that doing so comes with its own risks. Icarus's legacy is one of balance. A reminder that while we should never stop dreaming, we must also approach those dreams with wisdom, caution, and an understanding of the forces at play. His story is a reflection on the importance of not only reaching for the sun, but of understanding the wings that carry us. As we continue our own journeys, whether personal, professional, or as a society, the lessons of Icarus remain with us. The myth reminds us that the pursuit of greatness is not a path free from danger, but one that requires both courage and humility. It is a call to dream big, to aim high, but also to recognize when it is time to pause, to reflect, and to understand the limits of our own reach. It is in this balance between soaring and falling, between ambition and wisdom, that we find the true essence of human achievement. In the end, Icarus may have fallen from the sky, but his flight was not in vain. It lives on in every dreamer, in every soul who dares to reach for something greater than themselves. His story is a part of all of us, a reminder that we, too, are capable of great heights and great falls, but that it is the journey itself that shapes who we are and who we become. Thus, the story of Icarus concludes, but his legacy continues to inspire. For in his brief, breathtaking flight, he showed us not only the dangers of unchecked ambition, but the beauty of the human spirit's drive to reach the heavens. And in this, his legacy lives on, forever soaring, forever reaching, forever dreaming. As we come to the close of the tale of Icarus, we are reminded that myth, at its core, serves as more than a mere recounting of events. It is an exploration of what it means to be human, to strive, to dream, and to fail. Icarus, though lost to the sky, is not a figure of defeat, but of hope, a beacon of the untamed ambition that burns within all of us. His myth invites us to dream freely, to reach beyond what is known, and to understand that in doing so, we open ourselves to both the beauty and the cost of greatness. While Icarus's flight was brief, it was bold, it was beautiful, and it was human. We remember Icarus, not just for the tragedy of his fall, but for the bravery of his ascent. His story teaches us that even in the face of loss and failure, the pursuit of something higher, whether in art, in science, or in our personal lives, is a pursuit worth embarking upon. The myth reminds us that our greatest achievements are not always measured by success, but by the courage to reach for the impossible. The world, in all its ever-changing forms, continues to be shaped by those who dream beyond the horizon, who chase the sun, who dare to build wings and take flight. Icarus's legacy, though marked by his tragic end, endures as a testament to the human spirit, the endless capacity to push the boundaries of what we can achieve, and the wisdom gained through both triumph and failure. The lessons of Icarus are timeless. They are carried forward in the hearts of those who dream, who create, and who seek the stars, with full knowledge that the path to greatness is never without its dangers. But it is in this journey, this pursuit of freedom, this boldness of heart, that we find what it truly means to live, to learn, and to grow. As we bid farewell to the story of Icarus, we carry with us his spirit, the eternal dreamer who soared in a flight of brilliance and ambition. Though his wings may have faltered, his legacy is forever etched in the sky, reminding us all to reach, to rise, and to always remember that the true beauty of flight lies in the courage to soar, and to do so with wisdom in our hearts.